Imagine a grand historic concert hall, resting quietly just after the last note has faded into the velvet curtains. The heavy oak doors are closed to the rushing world outside. Inside, the air is still warm. Golden stage lights cast long, soft shadows across the empty wooden stage, illuminating millions of tiny dust motes drifting lazily in the amber glow. In this space, there is a profound stillness, but it is not empty. It is a silence that feels heavy with memory, vibrating with the echoes of cellos, the soft resonance of polished brass, and the lingering breath of 100 different instruments. Music, at its most fundamental level, is nothing more than the invisible waves of organized air moving through space. Yet, it holds centuries of human emotion, mapping the quietest corners of the mind and the deepest oceans of the heart. Picture the instruments themselves, resting in their velvet-lined cases. The deep, rich mahogany of a grand piano, its ivory keys cool to the touch, holding the potential for endless melodies beneath the heavy wooden lid. The curved, amber-coloured back of a violin, smelling faintly of ancient pine resin and aged varnish. The cold, smooth brass of a French horn, reflecting the dim light like a captured star. These objects are made of the earth, of wood, of metal, of horsehair and sap. But when touched by human hands, they become a bridge to something entirely immaterial. They translate the invisible landscape of human feeling into a physical sensation that can wash over you like a warm wave. As we journey through these hidden stories and quiet truths of classical music, there is absolutely no need to actively listen. You do not need to try to remember these facts. You do not need to hold on to any single detail. Let your mind soften, just like the dimming lights of the concert hall. Let these ideas drift gently through your awareness, like the slow bowing of a cello. If a thought captures your imagination, let it paint a picture behind your closed eyes. If your mind begins to wander, simply let it drift away on the current of the words. What stays with you, stays. What fades away is simply making room for deeper rest. Allow your breathing to slow, sinking into the cushions as we explore the quiet marvels of sound. Our journey begins not in a grand theatre, but in a quiet, frozen forest in northern Italy, over 300 years ago. Imagine the deep winter of the late 17th century, during a period historians now call the Little Ice Age. The snow falls silently, heavily, blanketing the alpine slopes. In this bitter, prolonged cold, the great spruce trees of the forest are forced to grow incredibly slowly. Their growth rings, responding to the chill, become tightly packed, creating wood of extraordinary, unusual density. Years later, a craftsman named Antonio Stradivari would walk through the quiet timber yards, running his hands over this very wood. He would carve it into violins with a resonance and brilliance that modern science still struggles to fully replicate. The breathtaking sound of a Stradivarius violin, a sound that has moved millions to tears, is, in part, the voice of that ancient freezing winter. It is the sound of a tree surviving the cold, captured in varnished wood, singing its slow, quiet resilience to us across the centuries. A freezing winter immortalized as warmth. That same miraculous preservation of beauty can be found not just in wood, but in the boundless capacity of the human mind. Travel south to Rome, to the echoing cavernous space of the Sistine Chapel. The air is thick with the scent of old myrrh, and hundreds of candles flicker, casting warm, dancing light across Michelangelo's breathtaking frescoes on the ceiling above. Here, in the 17th century, a choral piece known as the Allegri Miserere was performed. It was considered so profoundly beautiful, so sacred, that the Vatican strictly forbade anyone from writing it down or sharing it outside the chapel walls. It was a guarded secret, living only in the air of that specific room. But one evening, a 14-year-old boy named Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart sat quietly in the pews listening. He simply closed his eyes and let the 9 intersecting vocal lines wash over him. Later that night, sitting by the quiet light of a solitary candle, he wrote the entire complex, polyphonic masterpiece down from memory. He caught a fleeting, forbidden secret from the air and pinned it to paper, demonstrating the vast, almost magical reservoir of the human memory when captivated by pure beauty. Music is often thought of purely as an experience of the ears, but it is deeply, fundamentally tactile. It is a physical touch. Imagine a dusty room in Vienna, sunbeams illuminating dancing particles of dust in the air. Here we find Ludwig van Beethoven, a man slowly losing his connection to the audible world. As his hearing faded into a profound and isolating silence, his need to connect with the sound did not diminish. Instead, he found a new way to listen. He sawed the wooden legs off his grand piano, allowing the heavy instrument to rest flat against the floorboards. When he played, he would sit on the floor, pressing his body against the wood, feeling the music. He felt the low, rumbling vibration of the bass notes trembling through the grain of the floorboards, travelling through his skin and into his bones. He absorbed the resonance of the chords physically. It is a profound reminder that music is a force of nature, a physical vibration that can reach us and move us, even when the traditional pathways are closed. This desire to make an instrument feel alive, to give it a human soul, was perfected decades later in the soft glow of Parisian salons. The piano, by its very mechanical nature, is an instrument of percussion. Little felt hammers strike metal strings, and the sound naturally decays, fading away into the silence. Yet, Frédéric Chopin looked at this wooden box of hammers and wires and decided it should sing. Chopin was deeply enamoured not with other pianists, but with the bel canto singers of Italian opera, voices that could spin a single breath into a long, continuous, floating ribbon of sound. When he composed his famous nocturnes, his songs of the night, he treated the piano keys as if they had lungs. Through his ingenious use of the sustain pedal and delicate lingering melodies, he blurred the edges of the notes. He created the magical illusion of breath, making the percussive piano weep and sing in the quiet nighttime air. He transformed wood and wire into breath and emotion. This instinct to weave our breath and emotion into melody is older than our grandest cities. Leave the damp air of Europe and imagine the dry, baking heat of the ancient Mediterranean coast. The sun beats down on the pale dust of the ancient city of Ugarit in modern-day Syria. Deep in the earth, protected by the dry sand, archaeologists discovered a fragmented clay tablet. Upon this baked clay, pressed carefully with a reed stylus, were the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform script. But this was no ordinary record of grain or trade. It was a song, known as the Hurrian Hymn No. 6. It is the oldest surviving written melody in human history, dating back over 3,400 years. Imagine the ancient hands that shaped that clay, preserving a delicate melody meant to be plucked on a 9-stringed wooden lyre, a song dedicated to the goddess of the orchards. It is a comforting thought, realizing that the human impulse to sit under the stars and pluck a calming melody is an unbroken thread stretching across thousands of years. As humanity progressed, we learned not just to play melodies, but to paint entire landscapes with sound. Imagine standing on a bridge over the canals of Venice in the early 18th century. The winter air is sharp and freezing, misting your breath in the moonlight. Water laps against the ancient stone foundations. Antonio Vivaldi sat in this city, conceptualizing the 4 seasons. But he did more than just write pleasant harmonies. Vivaldi wrote accompanying sonnets, embedding specific, vivid imagery into the very notes of the sheet music. He instructed the string section to violently scrape their bows to mimic the harsh, chattering teeth of a freezing winter day. In the summer movements, the music slows to a languid, heavy crawl, perfectly capturing the oppressive heat of an August afternoon, where even the birds are too exhausted to sing. He was an invisible painter, using invisible vibrations to project high-definition, moving images directly into the imagination of the listener. our classical music is so deeply human, so representative of our highest ideals, that we have chosen it as our ambassador to the stars. Let your mind drift upward, leaving the atmosphere of the Earth, ascending into the profound, infinite silence of deep space. Drifting through the absolute dark is the Voyager 1 spacecraft, a small, fragile vessel sent outward by humanity. Bolted to its side is a golden record, a copper disc plated in gold, designed to last for 1 billion years. Alongside the recorded sounds of wind, rain, and a mother's resting heartbeat, the record carries the intricate mathematical perfection of Johann Sebastian Bach. His Brandenburg Concerto No. 2 flies continuously through the interstellar void. It is a stunning realization. A piece of music composed in a quiet, candlelit room in Germany centuries ago, played on wooden instruments, is now travelling farther than any human being will ever go, bringing the structured, beautiful logic of the human mind into the endless quiet of the cosmos. While some melodies journey into the future, others echo persistently out of the deep past, hiding in plain sight. Imagine the cold, stone halls of a medieval monastery. A choir of monks stands together, singing a solemn plainchant. The melody is called the Dies Irae, a sequence of 4 simple descending notes that rise and fall like a collective breath. These 4 notes are so elemental, so hauntingly evocative, that they became an invisible ghost haunting centuries of classical music. Composers from Hector Berlioz to Sergei Rachmaninoff seamlessly wove this ancient melody into their grand symphonies. It even carried over into the modern era, hidden in the soundtracks of countless films as a subtle musical shadow. It acts as a secret language, an acoustic thread connecting composers across hundreds of years. A quiet nod passed down through generations, ensuring that the breath of those medieval monks never truly faded away. The way these ancient, slow rhythms affect us is not merely emotional. It is deeply, profoundly biological. Think of the natural rhythm of your own body as you rest. Your heart beats in your chest, a steady, reliable, comforting drum. In the Baroque era, composers frequently wrote slow movements, designated by the musical term largo. These movements often naturally fall at a tempo of around 60 beats per minute. When you lie back and listen to a Baroque largo, a fascinating biological phenomenon occurs called entrainment. Without you even trying, your internal systems begin to listen to the music. Your resting heart rate gently begins to slow down, naturally syncing with the deliberate, unhurried bowing of the cellos. Your breathing deepens and lengthens to match the sweeping phrases of the violins. The music physically guides your nervous system into a state of deep calm, proving that we are beautifully wired to find peace in slow, organised sound. But perhaps the most profound realisation about classical music is that it is not solely about the sound. It is equally about the absence of it. Picture a symphony orchestra in full swing, sweeping through a dramatic passage, and then, suddenly, the conductor freezes in mid-air. The baton halts. The entire hall holds its collective breath in a moment of absolute ringing silence. In classical composition, silence is not just an empty space where music stops. It is mathematically measured, deliberately placed, and fiercely protected. The French composer Claude Debussy once famously observed that music is, in fact, the space between the notes. Like the negative space in a beautiful painting, or the deep breaths between spoken words, it is the silence that gives the sound its shape and its meaning. The rests on a page are just as vital as the notes themselves. They remind us that action is only meaningful because of rest, and that out of profound quiet the most beautiful things can emerge. That same profound quiet, the fertile space where notes are born, extends far beyond the wooden walls of any concert hall. Imagine the deep, velvety expanse of a star-filled sky, far removed from the ambient glow of our modern cities. The sheer, unfathomable scale of the cosmos above you, spinning in absolute freezing silence. Yet, In the early 17th century, the pioneering astronomer Johannes Kepler looked up into that dark expanse and did not see silence. He heard a magnificent, eternal symphony. Kepler spent his life studying the orbits of the planets, charting their elliptical paths around the sun. In his deeply mathematical and spiritual mind, he translated the shifting velocities of these celestial bodies into musical intervals. He believed in the musica universalis, the music of the spheres. He calculated that as the planets sped up and slowed down in their orbits, they produced varying pitches, creating a continuous slow-moving harmony that fills the solar system. He even theorized that our own Earth, with its specific orbital speed, hums a continuous low, melancholic note of mi in the cosmic scale. It is a deeply comforting thought to imagine that the very architecture of our solar system, the mathematics of gravity and starlight, is singing a quiet, endless lullaby through the void, uniting physics and melody into a single, elegant truth. The idea that everything in the universe is vibrating, connected by invisible frequencies, can be witnessed on a much smaller, more intimate scale in any music room. Picture a small, softly lit parlour at dusk. In opposite corners of the room, two finely crafted wooden cellos rest on their stands. The air between them is perfectly still, filled only with the faint scent of polished wood and dust. If you were to walk over to one cello and firmly pluck its thickest, heaviest string, the lowest C string, a rich, dark vibration would immediately fill the air. But something magical, almost ghostly, happens in the shadow of the opposite corner. Without anyone touching it, the corresponding C string on the second cello will begin to hum. It catches the invisible wave of energy travelling across the room and begins to vibrate in sympathy. This principle in acoustic physics is known as sympathetic resonance. The second instrument recognises the frequency of the first, and it cannot help but sing in response. It is a beautiful, invisible tether, a reminder that we are never truly isolated. Like the cellos, we are deeply sensitive instruments, constantly absorbing and reflecting the energy, the moods, and the quiet vibrations of the world around us. As your own body sinks deeper into the cushions, letting gravity hold you, you can allow yourself to resonate only with the calmest frequencies of the night. You do not need to hold on to any tension. Let the heavy muscles in your shoulders drop, much like the heavy wooden lid of a grand piano being gently lowered for the evening. A glossy black grand piano seems like a solid, monumental object, an unbroken curve of polished wood reflecting the dim room like a dark, still pool of water. But beneath that sleek exterior lies an impossibly intricate, hidden metropolis of mechanics. A modern concert grand piano is constructed from over 10,000 individual moving parts. It is a microscopic forest of materials harvested from the natural world. There are tiny, perfectly carved levers of white pine and maple. There are microscopic springs, polished metal pins, soft pads of tightly woven sheep's wool felt, and hinges crafted from delicate buckskin leather. When a pianist presses a single ivory key, a complex lightning-fast chain reaction occurs in the shadows of the piano's belly. It is an engineering marvel, designed over centuries to do one incredibly specific thing: to translate the infinitely subtle weight and emotion of a human touch into the exact velocity of a flying wooden hammer. Every sigh, every thunderous chord, every delicate, lingering note is the result of thousands of tiny, unseen parts working together in perfect, quiet harmony beneath the surface. Sometimes, the beauty of an instrument lies not in its complex wooden mechanics, but in its ability to capture the sound of pure light. In the late 19th century, the city of Paris was a bustling centre of mechanical invention, but in a quiet, unassuming workshop, a man named Auguste Mustel was crafting a secret. He invented a new instrument called the celesta. It looked like a small upright piano, but instead of strings, its inner hammers struck suspended steel plates, each positioned over a hollow wooden resonator. The sound it produced was entirely new to the world, a delicate, shimmering, crystalline ringing that sounded like water drops falling on glass, or stars gently chiming in the night sky. The Russian composer Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky heard this instrument while travelling through Paris and was instantly mesmerised by its heavenly tone. He immediately purchased one, but he was so fearful that his musical rivals, particularly Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, might discover it first, that he swore his publisher to absolute secrecy. Tchaikovsky had the instrument smuggled quietly across the borders into St. Petersburg. He kept the crystalline sound hidden away in the dark until the premiere of The Nutcracker, where he finally unveiled it in the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, enchanting the audience with a magical bell-like voice they had never imagined before. For some of the greatest minds in classical music, a melody like that of the Celesta was not merely an auditory experience, it was a brilliant shifting visual landscape. Imagine the concert hall going completely dark, only to be filled with sweeping beams of coloured light. For composers who experienced a neurological condition known as synesthesia, this was their everyday reality. Their sensory pathways were beautifully intertwined, causing them to physically see colours when they heard specific musical pitches or keys. The great Russian composer Alexander Scriabin saw the key of C major as a blinding, pure white light. The key of D major appeared to his mind's eye as a brilliant sunlit golden yellow. E major was the deep, calm sapphire of the midnight sky. When he composed, he wasn't just organising sound, he was painting an invisible aurora borealis across the ceiling of the concert hall. He even invented a unique instrument, a keyboard of lights, designed to project these specific colours onto a screen while the orchestra played, desperately trying to share his radiant multi-sensory universe with a world that could only listen. Even if you do not see golden yellows or midnight blues when you hear a chord, the internal landscape of your mind is still engaging in a quiet, beautiful dance. When you rest and simply allow a complex symphony to wash over you, a remarkable biological event takes place inside the dark, protected shell of the skull. Advanced neuroscience using functional magnetic resonance imaging has revealed that listening to classical music is the neurological equivalent of a full-body workout. The sound waves enter the ear, converting mechanical vibrations into electrical signals that travel deep into the brain. Instantly, the corpus callosum, the thick, fibrous bridge connecting the left and right hemispheres of your brain, lights up with activity. Music is one of the rare forces in the human experience that demands both sides of the brain to work simultaneously. The logical, mathematical left hemisphere busily processes the underlying structure, the tempo, and the rhythm. At the exact same moment, the creative, intuitive right hemisphere absorbs the emotional colour, the rising tension, and the beautiful release of the melody. Your mind, entirely on its own, weaves a glowing electric tapestry of connections, effortlessly processing centuries of mathematical and emotional genius, while you simply lie back and breathe. There is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to process right now. You can simply exist in the wash of the sound, letting the breath rise and fall. Like an audience member sitting comfortably in the plush velvet seats of a darkened auditorium, your only task is to be present. In the exact centre of that swirling colour and mathematical perfection, standing on a small wooden podium is the conductor. They are the focal point for 100 highly trained musicians, yet the conductor is the only person on stage who makes absolutely no sound at all. In their hand, they hold a slender baton, a wand of light fiberglass or wood, often painted stark white so its tip can be easily tracked in the dim, peripheral vision of the orchestra. The baton has a fascinating ancient lineage. In the extravagant courts of 17th century France, conductors like Jean-Baptiste Lully did not use light floating wands. They led the musicians by lifting heavy, ornate wooden staffs and pounding them directly onto the floorboards to physically hammer out the rhythm. It was a grounded, heavy and demanding way to keep time. But over the centuries, as music grew more fluid, more romantic and more expressive, that heavy wooden staff evolved into a feather-light extension of the conductor's own hand. The baton traces invisible shapes in the air, painting the breath, the volume, and the emotion of the piece. It is a masterclass in soft power and silent communication, turning the individual wills of 100 different musicians into a single, breathing, deeply unified organism, all guided by the gentle, sweeping arc of a white wand in the dark. The instruments watching that baton, particularly the violins and cellos of the string section, carry their own deep history in the very glow of their surfaces. When the stage lights catch the curved back of an antique string instrument, you can see a mesmerizing three-dimensional depth in the wood, a shimmering tiger stripe pattern that seems to move like liquid gold. This visual magic is the result of the varnish. For centuries, the exact recipes used by the legendary Cremonese instrument makers, like Stradivari and Guarneri, were fiercely guarded secrets, lost to time. Modern chemists have used lasers and mass spectrometry to peer into the microscopic layers of this ancient coating. They discovered a beautifully organic blend of the Earth's natural defences. The varnish was crafted from fossilised amber, slow-drying oils pressed from walnuts, and sticky aromatic gums harvested from fruit trees in the Mediterranean sun. The instruments are quite literally coated in ancient hardened sunlight and the protective lifeblood of old trees. This unique organic skin protects the fragile spruce and maple, but remains flexible enough to allow the wood to breathe, to expand, and to vibrate with an unmatched warmth that synthetic materials can never truly replicate. The warmth of that vibrating wood needs a carefully designed environment to truly bloom and reach the human ear. The pursuit of the perfect acoustic space is a science older than any modern steel-framed concert hall. To find its origins, we must travel back thousands of years to the dry, sun-baked hillsides of ancient Greece. Imagine standing in the centre of the great limestone theatre of Epidaurus. Carved directly into the sweeping curve of the earth, this massive open-air amphitheatre could hold thousands of spectators. Yet, the ancient architects understood the physics of sound so intimately, so perfectly, that a performer standing on the circular stage at the bottom could strike a single match, or softly tear a piece of paper, and the delicate sound would be heard with crystal clarity by someone sitting in the very top row, 50 stone tiers up. The secret lies in the limestone itself. The corrugated, step-like surface of the stone seats acts as a sophisticated acoustic filter. It naturally absorbs and dampens low-frequency background noise, like the murmur of the crowd or the rustling of the wind through the olive trees, while simultaneously scattering and amplifying the high, pure frequencies of the human voice and the lyre. It is an architectural marvel of the ancient world, a testament to humanity's deep, enduring desire to create a perfect, silent vessel where a single, fragile note can be heard and cherished by thousands. While the ancient Greeks built monumental stone structures to capture and preserve the clarity of a single, fleeting moment in time, modern composers have found ways to stretch a single musical moment across the centuries. Consider the profound concept of musical time, which is entirely elastic. In the quiet town of Halberstadt, Germany, inside the cool stone walls of the medieval St. Bouchardi church, an automated pipe organ is currently performing a piece of music. The composition is by the American avant-garde composer John Cage, and it is simply titled As Slow as Possible. The performance began in the year 2001. It is scheduled to conclude in the year 2640. It is a continuous, unbroken performance lasting exactly 639 years. Because the music moves at a glacial tectonic pace, a single chord is held for years at a time. Small, heavy sandbags are gently placed on the organ pedals to keep the mechanical valves open, allowing the air to flow continuously through the pipes, while the world outside rushes by. Every few years, crowds gather in the quiet church just to witness the shifting of a single note. It is music deliberately designed to outlive its creator, to outlive its current audience, and to outlive generations yet to be born. It acts as a profound monument to deep time, patience, and the slow, beautiful continuity of human creation. The slow, persistent note echoing through that empty stone church, passing gently into the long night, reminds us that some journeys are meant to unfold without any sense of rushing. This deep appreciation for the slow, deliberate passage of time took on a fascinating physical shape in the early 19th century. Picture a small, perfectly polished pyramid of dark mahogany wood sitting quietly on the flat lid of a grand piano. It catches the slanting golden rays of late afternoon sunlight, casting a long, sharp shadow across the sheet music. Inside this small wooden box is a beautifully balanced metal pendulum, a gleaming weight swinging back and forth with a steady, hypnotic and endlessly reliable click. This is the metronome. While we now think of time in music as something strictly measured, for centuries, a composer's tempo was merely a gentle suggestion, a fluid feeling dictated by the human heartbeat, the natural rhythm of walking, or the acoustics of a cathedral. It wasn't until a friend of Ludwig van Beethoven, a mechanic named Johann Nepomuk Malzel, patented and popularized this ticking device that composers could capture the exact, mathematical pulse they envisioned. Beethoven, residing entirely in his quiet, deaf world, was so thrilled by the invention that he became the first major composer to enthusiastically write specific metronome markings into his symphonies. It allowed him to package not just the written notes, but the exact pulse of his emotion, sending his literal driving heartbeat forward through the centuries so that musicians today can play his works with the precise rhythm that once echoed only in the silent chambers of his own mind. That rhythmic pulse, carrying the breath of the past, was historically voiced by materials drawn directly from the quietest corners of the natural world. Modern orchestras often shimmer with the bright, sharp tension of industrial steel strings, but for hundreds of years the voice of classical music was entirely organic and agricultural. Imagine a sun-drenched, rolling pasture in the Italian countryside centuries ago. The strings that Bach, Mozart and Vivaldi knew intimately were not made of drawn metal, but of sheep gut, meticulously cleaned, carefully twisted by hand, and left to dry in the warm, slow Mediterranean breeze. This material, often colloquially called catgut despite having nothing to do with felines, possessed a profoundly different texture than modern wire. It was infinitely warmer, softer to the touch, and highly sensitive to the humidity of the surrounding air. When a wooden bow strung with coarse horsehair was drawn across a gut string, the sound it produced was slightly husky, deeply resonant, and incredibly human. It beautifully resembled the subtle, breathy imperfections of a living singer's voice. It serves as a grounding reminder that the soaring, divine, and seemingly untouchable melodies of the Renaissance and Baroque eras were intimately tied to the pastoral earth, born directly from grass, sunlight, and the slow, quiet life of the open meadow. As your own breath deepens and settles into an easy, natural rhythm, you might notice how your chest rises and falls like the slow, heavy bowing of those ancient stringed instruments. You do not need to hold on to any tension in the muscles of your back or your shoulders. Simply let them sink further into the soft surface beneath you, completely supported by gravity. Sometimes, to find the deepest sense of physical grounding, we must look to things of truly monumental scale. In the mid-19th century, a highly ambitious French instrument maker named Jean-Baptiste Vuillaume decided to build an instrument that could reach the absolute murky bottom of the orchestral ocean. He created the octobass. Picture a stringed instrument so impossibly colossal, standing nearly 12 feet tall, towering in the shadows of the stage like a grand old oak tree, that a standard human being cannot possibly play it with their hands alone. The strings are as thick as heavy maritime ropes. To press them down and change the pitch, the musician must stand on a specialized wooden podium beside the neck and operate a complex system of brass hand levers and heavy foot pedals. The sound it produces is so remarkably low, so profoundly deep, that it flirts with the very edge of human hearing. It is a subsonic rumble, a tectonic purr that you feel vibrating through the floorboards and deep within your own ribs long before your ears can even register the acoustic note, grounding the entire soaring orchestra in an invisible earthly weight. That deep subsonic rumble is akin to the heavy comforting blanket of nightfall that eventually covers the world, softening the sharp edges of the day. As the sun dips below the horizon and the chaotic, bright noises of the waking hours fade away, the atmosphere fundamentally shifts, creating a quiet space for a different kind of reflection. In the early 1800s, an Irish composer named John Field recognised the unique, melancholic beauty of a world lit only by moonlight. He invented a completely new genre of piano music and named it the nocturne, a word simply meaning of the night. Picture a single, tall candle flickering in a drafty, silver-lit drawing room, casting long, wavering and dancing shadows across the damask wallpaper. Field's nocturne, which would later be famously perfected by Frédéric Chopin, were designed not for grand, echoing concert halls, but for intimate, quiet, heavily curtained spaces. They typically featured a slow, rolling, undulating rhythm in the left hand, beautifully mimicking the gentle lapping of dark water against a stone pier, while the right hand floated a solitary, vocal-like melody effortlessly above it. It was music specifically engineered to companion the restless mind during the quietest hours, an acoustic sanctuary where the deep, introspective thoughts of midnight could finally be spoken aloud in the soft, private language of ivory and felt. The gentle lapping of water against stone is not merely a poetic metaphor in classical music. It has served as the literal physical stage for some of history's grandest and most extravagant compositions. Imagine the River Thames in London on a mild, foggy evening in the summer of 1717. The river water is dark, glassy and slow-moving, reflecting the warm orange glow of hundreds of torches hanging from the gilded edges of elegant floating wooden barges. King George I had requested a spectacular concert on the water, and the composer George Friedrich Handel delivered a masterpiece uniquely suited for the open, humid air, aptly named the water music. Because the sound had to travel across the wide, misty expanse of the river without the echoing walls of a traditional theatre to contain and amplify it, Handel strategically packed his floating orchestra with bright, piercing brass instruments. He used an abundance of French horns and trumpets that could easily cut through the dense, foggy atmosphere. As the royal barge drifted slowly down the Thames, the majestic music glided effortlessly over the rippling surface. The water itself acted as a massive natural acoustic mirror, reflecting the sound upward and carrying it beautifully to the thousands of citizens gathered on the muddy banks. It is a striking image of art adapting entirely to its natural environment, turning a winding, foggy river into the longest, most magnificent concert hall the city had ever known. While some majestic music is explicitly designed to project across a vast river and reach the ears of thousands, other intricate masterpieces are hidden within the smallest, most intimate details, waiting patiently for centuries to be noticed. Imagine the quiet scratching of a quill pen on heavy, rough-edged parchment, illuminated only by the dim light of a single frosted window. Johann Sebastian Bach was undeniably a master of grand mathematical complexity and vast choral works, but he also possessed a remarkably quiet, secretive sense of play. In the traditional German musical alphabet, the note B-flat is written as the letter B, and the note B natural is written as the letter H. Bach realised that his own surname could be translated directly into a melody. He began to subtly weave this distinct four-note motif, B, A, C, H, into the depths of his compositions. It was a brilliant musical cryptogram, an invisible signature tucked seamlessly away in the dense intertwining vines of his complex counterpoint. When you look closely at the fragile sheet music of his final, famously unfinished masterpiece, The Art of Fugue, you can see his name permanently encoded in the very last notes he ever committed to paper before his death. He did not merely sign the bottom of the page in ink. He built his very identity into the architectural foundation of the sound itself, leaving a quiet piece of his soul woven forever into the microscopic fabric of the music. As your mind softly traces these hidden patterns and invisible signatures, there is absolutely no need to try and solve them or hold them in your memory. You can allow your thoughts to drift as freely and aimlessly as a small feather riding a warm, invisible updraft of air. Your body is heavy, safe, and entirely still, while your imagination is completely free to take flight. Long before human beings carved names into parchment or learned to stretch sheep gut strings across polished wood, the air was already filled with the complex, dazzling, and ancient symphonies of the natural world. In the 20th century, the highly innovative French composer Olivier Messiaen found his greatest, most profound inspiration not in dusty academic libraries, but in the damp, vibrant, and living heart of the forest. He deeply considered birds to be the greatest, most pure musicians on the planet. Messiaen would frequently wake long before dawn, venturing out into the quiet, cold woods with nothing but a notebook and a pencil, waiting patiently for the sun to rise. As the forest canopy erupted with the chaotic beauty of the morning chorus, he would frantically and meticulously transcribe the exact pitches, rhythms, and frantic leaping intervals of the blackbird, the nightingale, and the woodlark. He incorporated these literal, unedited bird calls into his grand orchestral works and incredibly complex solo piano pieces. He transformed the sterile concert stage into an ancient, towering forest canopy, beautifully reminding us that humanity did not invent music. We merely learned how to listen, and eventually how to join a chorus that the earth had already been singing for millions of years. That deep, enduring connection to the ancient, untamed world is perhaps most visually striking in the sweeping golden silhouette of the concert harp. Picture it resting alone on a quiet stage, its elegant curved wooden neck gleaming under the warm theatre lights, heavily resembling the wing of an archaic, mythical bird or a celestial angel. The harp is one of the oldest recognizable instruments in human history, depicted in the tombs of ancient pharaohs, but the modern orchestral harp standing on stage today is a staggering feat of hidden, industrial-era engineering. While the audience sitting in the dark sees only a graceful gilded frame and a shimmering waterfall of vibrating strings, the internal vertical pillar of the harp conceals an incredibly complex watch-like mechanism. Running straight down the centre of that golden column are over 2,000 tiny interconnected brass links, metal rods, and delicate gears. When the harpist presses one of the 7 brass pedals at the base of the instrument with their foot, this intricate hidden nervous system engages instantly. It pulls microscopic metal discs that grip and shorten specific strings, changing their pitch in the absolute blink of an eye. It is an instrument of profound and beautiful duality. Above the surface, it is all ethereal grace, producing a cascading sound like rippling water, falling snow, or drifting clouds. But beneath the golden veneer, it is a marvel of precise mechanical tension, perfectly marrying the heavy logic of metal gears with the weightless floating beauty of a dream. Imagine taking that beautifully strung, tension-filled instrument and removing the human hands from the equation entirely, letting the atmosphere itself become the musician. In the Romantic era, particularly in the breezy, mist-shrouded and ivy-covered estates of England and Germany, there was a deep cultural fascination with an instrument called the Aeolian harp. Picture a long, narrow, beautifully crafted wooden box strung with several delicate catgut strings, placed gently on the stone windowsill of an old manor house. The glass window is left slightly open to the cool, damp evening air. As the invisible wind blows through the narrow opening, it rushes rapidly over the tight strings. The naturally varying air pressure causes the strings to vibrate completely on their own, producing haunting, swelling, and fading chords that rise and fall organically with the breath of the weather. It is an instrument played exclusively by the passing atmosphere, completely untouched by human fingers. The sound it produces is famously eerie, deeply calming, and slightly metallic, a shimmering harmonic drone that sounds entirely unearthly, as if the house itself is softly singing. It was fiercely beloved by romantic poets and dreamers precisely because it required absolutely no human intervention. It served as a beautiful, passive bridge between the domestic, firelit warmth of the home and the wild, untamed, invisible forces of nature outside, a gentle acoustic reminder that the world itself is constantly humming, waiting only for a string to catch its breath. Before the wind can play its invisible chords, or the massive orchestra can begin its grand, coordinated journey, there must always be a crucial moment of alignment, a gathering of all those disparate strings, glowing brass tubes, and complex wooden mechanisms. Picture the chaotic, wonderful, and slightly overwhelming noise of an orchestra warming up on stage. Over 100 highly trained musicians are seated together under the bright lights, each playing their own rapid, disconnected scales, adjusting their wooden reeds and tightening the hair on their bows. It is a thick cacophony of individual preparations, a sea of beautiful noise without direction. But then, a subtle shift happens. The principal oboist stands up in the exact centre of the ensemble. They raise their dark, slender wooden instrument to their lips, take a deep, stabilising breath, and play a single, unwavering note, an A, vibrating at exactly 440 Hz. Instantly, the sprawling chaos begins to subside. Like scattered iron filings aligning to a sudden, powerful magnetic field, the entire orchestra turns its physical and mental attention to this solitary, piercing, and pristine sound. The violins tune their 4 strings to match it perfectly. The cellos find their deep resonance within it. The heavy brass section aligns its metallic breath to the same frequency. This single, pure tone acts as a beacon, cutting through the dark, transforming 100 isolated, wandering individuals into a single, massive, breathing organism, poised directly on the edge of silence, completely unified and ready for whatever sonic landscape is about to unfold. The pure, unwavering pitch of that single unifying note, that perfect A, owes its consistency to a delightfully simple, elegantly shaped piece of metal invented in the early 18th century. Imagine a small, perfectly smooth, 2-pronged steel fork resting heavily on a dark velvet cloth. This is the tuning fork, created in 1711 by a musician named John Shaw, who served as a royal trumpeter for the British court. Before this quiet, unassuming invention, establishing a shared pitch across different cities or even different rooms was an imprecise, constantly shifting negotiation. But Shaw realised that a precisely cut piece of steel, when gently struck against a solid surface, would vibrate at an exact, unvarying frequency, regardless of the weather, the dampness in the air, or the acoustics of the room. It was a pocket-sized anchor of acoustic truth. When the 2 rigid tines of the fork vibrate, they move rapidly in opposite directions, creating a pure, almost mathematically perfect sine wave of sound that is incredibly rare in the chaotic, overtoned natural world. The tuning fork elegantly took the abstract, invisible concept of harmony and turned it into a heavy, cold, reliable physical object that a travelling musician could slip into their coat pocket, ensuring that the exact same pure vibration could be carried across vast oceans and centuries without ever losing its solid centre. That deep human desire to extract pure, unearthly tones from cold, hard materials led to one of the most mesmerising and hypnotic instruments ever conceived. Picture a dimly lit parlour in the late 18th century, the heavy curtains drawn against the evening chill. In the centre of the room sits an elegant mahogany spindle, along which dozens of delicate, concentric glass bowls are tightly nested. They range from large, resonant bowls on one side to tiny, fragile cups at the very tip. This is the glass harmonica, famously invented by Benjamin Franklin. Rather than striking the fragile glass with heavy mallets, the musician gently presses wet, bare fingertips against the spinning rims. As the bowls spin rapidly on a mechanical foot treadle, the gentle friction of the damp skin creates a continuous glowing hum. The sound is utterly ethereal and strangely disembodied, hovering heavily in the air like a localized fog. It was considered so deeply enchanting, so softly penetrating to the human nervous system, that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, usually a master of grand orchestral textures, composed a remarkably intimate, hauntingly beautiful piece specifically for it. It is music drawn out by the gentlest, most patient of touches, relying entirely on the fragile singing properties of spun glass and pure water. The profound, ringing acoustic resonance found in a spinning glass bowl is only a miniature, domesticated reflection of the massive echoing chambers naturally carved into the earth itself. Travel far north, away from the warm parlours of mainland Europe, to the cold, slate-grey waters of the Inner Hebrides in Scotland. Here, rising abruptly from the churning sea, is an uninhabited island made entirely of towering hexagonal basalt columns. Cut deep into this strange geometric dark rock is Fingal's Cave. The cave acts as a natural soaring cathedral of wet stone, wide open to the relentless heavy rhythm of the ocean tides. In 1829, the young romantic composer Felix Mendelssohn rowed a small wooden boat directly into the yawning mouth of this sea cave. He was immediately struck not just by the visual grandeur of the ancient pillars, but by the staggering, booming, immersive acoustics. The rhythmic crashing of the heavy waves against the dark stone created a deep harmonic resonance that filled the cavern with a low, breathing roar. Captivated by this wild, natural symphony, Mendelssohn instantly jotted down the opening phrase of what would become his famous Hebrides overture right there in the rocking boat, surrounded by the smell of salt spray. He didn't simply write a pleasant song about the ocean, he translated the literal echoing architecture of the stone and the physical, driving weight of the water directly into moving sheet music. As you imagine the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of that dark ocean water inside the ancient sheltering cave, notice how your own breathing naturally mirrors that steady, effortless tide. The chest rises and falls without any conscious effort or force. The mind can simply drift on these gentle currents of sound, safely letting go of the need to steer or control the journey. The physical body is a heavy anchor, resting deeply in the cushions, while the imagination glides smoothly across the dark, echoing water. To truly capture the deep, mythical resonance of the earth and its ancient, water-carved caves, sometimes existing, familiar instruments simply are not enough to paint the necessary picture. In the late 19th century, Richard Wagner was fully immersed in composing his monumental Ring Cycle, a sprawling, epic, deeply psychological narrative of gods, sleeping dragons, and subterranean magic. He listened critically to the brass section of his orchestra and felt a vital colour was missing from his acoustic palette. The traditional French horns were too warm, pastoral and noble, while the heavy trombones were too bright, direct and aggressive. He needed a sound that existed perfectly in the twilight shadows between the two, a sound that carried the solemn, brooding darkness of an ancient underground realm untouched by sunlight. So, he instructed instrument makers to design an entirely new voice, which we now call the Wagner tuba. Imagine a large, oval-shaped coil of gleaming dark brass, resting heavily in the seated musician's lap, played with a deep, conical mouthpiece. The sound it produces is incredibly round, majestic, and undeniably sombre, heavily resembling a solemn, wordless chant echoing slowly up from a bottomless stone canyon. Wagner literally invented a new, physical voice for the orchestra, simply because the deep mythological landscape in his mind demanded a rich colour of sound that the waking world had not yet provided. While Wagner looked downward into the mythological depths of the heavy earth for his inspiration, other visionary composers turned their eyes upward toward the vast, silent, weightless expanse of the night sky. In the early 20th century, the English composer Gustav Holst composed a monumental orchestral suite titled The Planets. While the most famous and widely recognised movement might be the driving metallic rhythm of Mars, the bringer of war, it is the second movement, Venus, the bringer of peace, that offers the most profound and lasting sense of tranquility. Imagine standing alone on a quiet hill, looking through a polished brass telescope at the cool, pale white dot of Venus hanging perfectly still in the darkening twilight sky. To capture this celestial serenity, Holst completely stripped away the heavy brass instruments and the pounding drums. Instead, he relied exclusively on the cool silver tones of flutes, the gentle water-like pluck of the harp, and the delicate shimmering chime of the glockenspiel. The chords move with a glacial slow-motion grace, completely unhurried, floating weightlessly in acoustic space. It is a stunning, meticulously crafted auditory illusion, perfectly capturing the silent, cooling, untouched stillness of the deep cosmos. It reminds us that looking up at the stars has always been a way for humanity to find perspective, quietly cooling the fiery anxieties of daily life with the sheer, unimaginably vast scale of the universe. Sometimes, the most exquisite, unearthly melodies do not come from observing the distant stars or the crashing oceans, but are handed to us softly in the absolute depths of our own quiet slumber. The architecture of the sleeping mind is a vast, unmapped territory, fully capable of producing profound, staggering beauty without any conscious effort. In the early 18th century, the Italian composer and master violinist Giuseppe Tartini experienced a dream so vivid, so musically perfect, that it fundamentally changed his life. In the quiet of his moonlit room, wrapped in heavy blankets and deep in sleep, he dreamed that he handed his favourite violin to a shadowy, supernatural figure at the foot of his bed. To Tartini's absolute astonishment, the figure lifted the wooden bow and played a sonata of such breathtaking, intricate beauty, executed with such transcendent grace, that Tartini literally stopped breathing in his sleep. The sheer, overwhelming perfection of the music woke him instantly. He scrambled out of bed in the dark, his heart racing, desperately grabbing his quill and a scrap of parchment, trying to capture the fading, ghostly echo of the dream before it completely dissolved into the cold morning light. The result was his famously demanding Devil's Trill Sonata. While he always lamented that his conscious waking version was only a pale, clumsy shadow of the pure music he heard in his sleep, the piece stands as a beautiful, encouraging testament to the subconscious mind's incredible, innate capacity to spontaneously generate radiant art, while the physical body rests in total, peaceful paralysis. The act of capturing those fleeting dreams and divine inspirations in dark ink was not merely an intellectual or abstract exercise. It was an act of intense, loving, physical labour. Picture a small, quiet, heavily shadowed room in Leipzig during the dead of winter. The stone fireplace crackles softly in the corner, providing the only warmth in the house. Sitting closely together at a wide wooden desk is Anna Magdalena Bach, the second wife of Johann Sebastian. She was a highly gifted professional soprano herself, but her most enduring, profoundly silent contribution to music history lies in the thousands upon thousands of pages of thick parchment she meticulously copied by hand. Before the modern era of mass printing, every single part for every individual musician in an orchestra had to be transcribed note by single note, line by tedious line, dipping a sharp quill into a glass inkwell thousands of times. Over the many long years of sitting intimately beside her husband, sharing the quiet, isolating hours of the deep night copying his complex compositions, a beautiful phenomenon occurred. Anna Magdalena's own natural handwriting began to subtly shift and change, slowly morphing over the decades until it became almost entirely indistinguishable from Johann Sebastian's own hand. Her pen strokes naturally synchronized with his rhythm. It is a deeply moving, silent testament to a life shared in absolute harmony, where profound devotion and love were physically, permanently etched into the very curves, stems and lines of the sheet music, slowly rendering two distinct, brilliant individuals into one unified, visual, creative voice. Notice how the rhythm of your own heart beats steadily in the background, a quiet, dependable metronome keeping perfect time while you rest. There is absolutely nothing you need to accomplish right now. Just as those two overlapping styles of dark handwriting flowed effortlessly across the heavy, textured parchment, you can allow your own thoughts to flow effortlessly across your mind, leaving no permanent mark, holding no tension, simply passing through the quiet, open space of your gentle awareness. The straight lines and round spaces drawn so carefully on those heavy parchment pages, the very visual foundation of how we see and understand music today, originated from the shape and form of the human body itself. Rewind even further to the 11th century, to the quiet, echoing stone cloisters of a remote Italian monastery. A brilliant, patient monk named Guido d'Arezzo was frustrated by how difficult it was to teach the young choir boys new, complex, intertwining melodies by rote memory alone. He realized that music, an invisible force, desperately needed a visual map. He introduced the revolutionary idea of drawing straight horizontal lines on a page and placing marks upon them to represent high and low pitches, the true birth of the modern musical staff. But to teach this new, abstract map to his students, he used a profoundly tactile, intimate method known as the Guidonian hand. He mapped the different notes of the musical scale directly onto the joints, tips, and creases of the human fingers. The choir master would stand before the boys and simply point to the tip of his left thumb, the middle knuckle of his index finger, or the fleshy base of his pinky, and the choir would know exactly which tone to sing. It beautifully, seamlessly transformed the invisible, abstract concept of sound into a tangible physical geography. The human hand became the first instrument, a flesh and bone map that guided the voice, intimately linking the physical sensation of touch to the vocalization of harmony. From drawing invisible sound on the joints and knuckles of the hand, humanity eventually magically learned how to pull music directly out of thin air without making any physical contact at all. Step forward into the buzzing, electrified, hopeful atmosphere of the early 1920s. A brilliant Russian physicist named Leon Theremin invented an instrument that looks far more like a piece of complex scientific laboratory equipment than something you would traditionally find in a velvet-lined concert hall. The theremin consists of a simple wooden box containing glowing vacuum tubes, with two polished metal antennas projecting outward. When powered on, it projects invisible, silent, highly sensitive electromagnetic fields into the empty air surrounding it. The musician plays the instrument simply by moving their bare hands delicately through the empty space. Bringing the right hand closer to the straight, vertical antenna raises the pitch of the note, while moving the left hand near the looped horizontal antenna controls the volume and fade. The result is a continuous, gliding, incredibly vocal-like wail that seems to materialize from absolute nothingness. Watching a master gracefully play the theremin is like watching a sorcerer slowly weave spells in the air, delicately plucking invisible strings of pure, vibrating energy. It is the only musical instrument in existence played entirely without the physical sensation of touch, a beautiful, mesmerizing paradox of controlling the physical, audible world solely through focused intention and silent proximity. Whether plucking invisible fields of electromagnetic energy in the air, or pressing heavy ivory keys on a wooden piano, the ultimate goal of the composer is often to create a deeply soothing sense of continuous, effortless forward motion. In the classical era, particularly in the delicate, highly structured piano sonatas of Mozart and Haydn, composers needed a way to support a beautiful, floating right-hand melody without making the left-hand accompaniment sound too heavy, blocky, or muddy. The brilliant solution was an elegant, hypnotic, and incredibly simple pattern known as the Alberti bass. Instead of playing all the thick notes of a chord at the exact same time, the left hand breaks them apart into a gently rolling repeating sequence. The lowest note, the highest note, the middle note, and the highest note again, played in a continuous, endlessly looping cycle. Picture a small, perfectly clear brook bubbling gently over smooth river stones in a dappled, sunlit forest. The water is constantly moving, constantly shifting its shape around the rocks, yet the overall texture and the gentle sound remain incredibly uniform, reliable, and deeply peaceful. The Alberti bass creates this exact acoustic illusion. It provides a soft, rhythmic engine that gently propels the music forward, a quiet, mesmerizing motor of broken chords that ensures the delicate melody never stalls or loses momentum, but instead glides effortlessly along, exactly like a fallen leaf carried calmly and inevitably downstream, drifting gently toward a quiet horizon that is always softly unfolding. This gentle drifting, this elasticity of forward motion, is captured beautifully in a musical concept known as tempo rubato. In Italian, the phrase literally translates to stolen time. When a pianist sits alone in a quiet room, playing a deeply emotional nocturne in the fading light, they do not adhere to the rigid mechanical ticking of a clock. Instead, they stretch and compress the seconds, lingering heavily on a poignant chord, stealing a moment of time from one phrase, only to give it back by gently accelerating through the next. Frédéric Chopin, the absolute master of the Romantic piano, taught this fluid concept to his students by asking them to picture a great ancient tree standing in a sweeping meadow. The heavy, solid trunk of the tree represents the left hand, keeping the steady, reliable heartbeat of the music rooted in the earth. But the high branches and the delicate leaves, representing the right-hand melody, are entirely free to sway, bend and rustle wildly in the passing wind. The roots never move, the foundation is completely safe and secure, but the melody is allowed to breathe, sigh and dance with an organic human flexibility that no machine could ever replicate. It is a profound reminder that time, in its most beautiful state, is not a strict grid we must obey, but a fluid material we can shape and soften. When the desire is to soften the sound even further, pulling the listener into an almost impossible intimacy, string musicians use a remarkably simple, ancient tool called a sordino, or a mute. Picture the wooden bridge of a cello, a beautifully carved, thin piece of pale maple wood that holds the heavy strings high above the hollow belly of the instrument. The bridge acts as a frantic messenger, transferring the aggressive vibrations of the bowed strings directly down into the large resonating chamber. But when a composer wants to create the acoustic illusion of distance, or the feeling of a secret being whispered, the cellist gently clips a tiny heavy piece of dense ebony wood or solid rubber onto the very top edge of that maple bridge. This small addition acts as an immediate physical dampener. It naturally absorbs the highest, brightest frequencies, filtering out the sharp overtones before they can even reach the hollow wood below. The resulting sound changes instantly. It becomes veiled, shadowy, and deeply muffled, as if the entire orchestra has suddenly stepped behind a heavy velvet curtain, or as if the music is drifting softly through the walls from a distant, memory-filled room in another part of the house. As that muted, distant sound echoes gently in your imagination, you might notice your own body growing heavier, sinking deeper into the soft surfaces supporting you. The breath naturally settles. The sharp, bright edges of the waking day have been entirely filtered out, leaving only a warm, comfortable shadow where the mind can simply drift without resistance. For the unmuted, full-throated voice of those string instruments to truly project and fill a grand concert hall, the sound must find a way to escape the dark interior of the wooden box. If you look closely at the curved belly of a violin or a cello, you will see two elegant swirling openings carved directly into the spruce wood. These are known as the F-holes, named for their graceful resemblance to the lowercase, italic letter F. But their beautiful shape is not merely a decorative flourish decided by an artist. it is the result of centuries of slow, trial-and-error acoustic evolution. In the earliest days of stringed instruments, the sound holes were often carved as simple, perfect circles or intricate geometric rosettes. But over hundreds of years, luthiers listening carefully to the resonance realized that the specific elongated shape of the F, with its narrow stem and small circular eyes at the ends, allowed for the maximum amount of acoustic airflow while removing the absolute minimum amount of structural wood. The elegant curves literally optimize the way the low-frequency air masses pump in and out of the hollow body, functioning exactly like the slow, deep expansion and contraction of a human lung. The mathematics of the physical universe perfectly dictated a shape of supreme, sweeping beauty. That same marriage of immense physical tension and sweeping visual beauty is perhaps most dramatic in the iconic silhouette of a concert grand piano. When you look at the smooth, polished outer rim of a grand piano, it appears to be carved from a single, impossibly large ancient tree, flowing like a dark ribbon of frozen liquid around the iron frame. In reality, that massive, continuous curve is a triumph of 19th century engineering. It is constructed from up to 20 long, thin, flexible layers of hard rock, maple and mahogany. In a quiet, dust-filled factory, artisans coat these thin strips with heavy glue, stack them together, and then manually force them around a massive solid steel mold shaped like the piano. Using heavy metal clamps, they bend the stubborn straight wood into that sweeping curve, locking the immense physical tension permanently into place as the glue dries. The wood desperately wants to snap back into a straight line, but it is held forever in a graceful arc. This captive tension is exactly what turns the outer rim into a massive rigid acoustic reflector, effortlessly projecting the delicate vibration of a tiny felt hammer out toward the farthest, darkest rows of the auditorium. When those projected sound waves finally leave the instrument, they rely entirely on the surrounding architecture to cradle them. Consider the breathtaking interior of the Große Musikvereinssaal in Vienna, widely considered to possess the most perfect golden acoustics on the planet. The room is shaped like a simple rectangular shoebox, completely covered in ornate gilded balconies, heavy crystal chandeliers and classical statues. But the true secret to its legendary enveloping sound lies completely out of sight, deep beneath the feet of the musicians. The stage where the orchestra sits is not built on a solid foundation of concrete or packed earth. Instead, it is constructed from resonant, flexible wood, suspended directly over a massive, empty, hollow chamber in the basement. When the heavy double basses and the cellos rest their sharp metal end pins directly onto the wooden floorboards and begin to play, the entire hollow stage acts as a colossal, secondary resonating box. The floor itself vibrates, transferring those deep, subsonic frequencies through the architecture and directly into the velvet seats of the audience. The building is not merely a container for the concert. The room itself is a massive, incredibly sensitive wooden instrument, singing along in perfect, silent sympathy with the orchestra. Just as that grand, hollow stage perfectly supports the heavy weight of the music, you can allow the mattress beneath you to take all of your physical weight. There is no need to hold yourself up. You can surrender entirely to gravity, feeling the solid, quiet support beneath you, completely safe and perfectly held in this moment of deep rest. The profound, reverberating weight of the orchestra's lowest registers is largely commanded by a magnificent instrument resting quietly at the very back of the stage, the timpani, or the kettle drums. Picture 4 massive gleaming bowls of hammered copper, catching the amber stage lights, each covered tightly with a translucent, beautifully textured sheet of calf skin. For centuries, tuning a heavy drum in the middle of a performance was an agonizingly slow process, requiring the musician to frantically turn dozens of metal screws by hand along the rim while the rest of the orchestra played on. But in the late 19th century, a brilliant mechanical solution was hidden perfectly out of sight. Modern timpani are equipped with an ingenious heavy iron foot pedal connected to a central spiderweb of metal rods inside the copper bowl. With a single, smooth, silent press of their heel, the timpanist can instantly increase or decrease the tension across the entire surface of the drumhead simultaneously. It allows them to change the massive booming pitch of the drum in the absolute blink of an eye, smoothly gliding between deep, thunderous notes with the delicate, effortless grace of a dancer, providing a solid, shifting acoustic foundation for the entire symphony to stand upon. The ability to gracefully control tension and volume completely revolutionized the keyboard family as well, shifting the musical world out of the rigid Baroque era and into a softer, more emotionally fluid age. For generations, the harpsichord ruled the salons of Europe. It was a beautiful instrument, but its internal mechanics plucked the metal strings with small pieces of bird quill. No matter how softly or aggressively a musician pressed the keys, the volume of the note remained exactly the same. It was a world of rigid light and dark with no acoustic shadows in between. But in the early 1700s, an Italian instrument maker named Bartolomeo Cristofori yearned for twilight. He invented an entirely new mechanism where the strings were struck by tiny leather-covered hammers that immediately fell away, allowing the string to ring freely and sustain. Most importantly, the speed at which the hammer struck was completely controlled by the physical weight of the player's fingers. He named his invention the gravicembalo col piano e forte, the keyboard with soft and loud. We know it today simply as the piano. This single, brilliant mechanical shift allowed composers to finely sculpt deep, fading shadows, delicate whispers, and roaring, thunderous swells from a single keyboard, beautifully mirroring the infinite, shifting complexities of human emotion. While mechanical hammers and copper bowls rely on physical engineering to sustain their resonance, the human voice achieves its most hypnotic, unbroken effects through quiet, invisible cooperation. Imagine sitting in a vast, echoing stone cathedral, listening to a massive choir of 80 singers performing a slow, sacred Renaissance Mass. They strike a pure, radiant chord, and the sound seems to hang suspended in the cold air, completely unbroken, for an impossible amount of time. It stretches on for a minute, then 2 minutes, far longer than any human lung could possibly hold a single breath. The choir is creating the acoustic illusion of eternity, using a deeply collaborative technique known as staggered breathing. Without any visible signal or gesture, individual singers in the choir intentionally drop out of the chord for just a fraction of a second, silently taking a deep, replenishing breath, and then softly re-entering the collective sound. Because there are so many voices, and because the singers randomly alternate their breaths, the listener sitting in the pews never hears a single break in the music. It is a profound, beautiful metaphor for community and shared burden. The individual must pause to rest, but the collective whole carries the magnificent, unbroken sound effortlessly forward into the infinite. The desire to create an unbroken, infinite thread of sound led 20th century inventors to look beyond the human body entirely and into the invisible, humming world of electricity. In 1928, a French cellist and radiotelegrapher named Maurice Martineau unveiled an instrument of breathtaking, eerie beauty called the onde de Martineau. It featured a traditional piano keyboard, but the true magic lay in a small, delicate metal ring attached to a wire running parallel to the keys. The musician slips this wiring over their right index finger. By sliding their hand smoothly left and right through the empty air, they control the frequency of an oscillating vacuum tube hidden inside a wooden cabinet. The resulting sound is a sweeping, continuous, ghostly sigh that can effortlessly glide between pitches without ever breaking, sounding remarkably like a solitary, mournful human voice echoing through a vast empty canyon. The great composer Olivier Messiaen was completely captivated by its cosmic, unearthly wail, frequently featuring it in his most spiritual grand symphonies to represent the voice of the divine, pulling an impossibly smooth, limitless melody directly out of the raw, buzzing electricity of the modern age. Yet, no matter how infinitely a chord can be sustained by staggered breathing or glowing vacuum tubes, all sound must eventually gracefully return to the quiet space from which it emerged. In the written language of classical sheet music, there is a beautiful, deeply poetic symbol designed specifically to govern this transition into silence. It is called the fermata. Visually, it looks like a small, sweeping arch with a single dot placed perfectly in the centre, resting gently above a note or a rest on the page. Musicians often affectionately refer to it as the bird's eye. When a conductor arrives at a fermata, the strict mathematical ticking of the metronome is instantly abolished. The forward motion of the piece entirely stops. The orchestra holds that final shimmering note, or that suspended silence, for an unspecified, intuitive amount of time. The length of the pause is governed completely by the feeling in the room, the resonance of the hall, and the steady guiding hand of the conductor hovering in the stage light. It is a deeply shared moment of suspension, a collective holding of breath, where the tension of the music is allowed to slowly, perfectly dissolve into the heavy air, leaving behind a residue of pure crystalline stillness. This stillness is not an absence, but a presence, a quiet garden where the seeds of the next great movement are sown. Imagine walking through a sprawling manicured estate in the English countryside during the height of the Enlightenment. The air is cool, scented with damp earth and boxwood hedges. In the centre of this greenery stands a small circular stone temple, an architectural folly designed purely for the delight of the senses. This is the environment that birthed the Galant style of the mid-18th century. Composers like Johann Christian Bach, the youngest son of the great master, decided that music had become too dense, too mathematical, and too intellectually heavy. They sought a return to elegant simplicity. They prioritized a single, graceful melody that could float effortlessly over a light, transparent accompaniment, much like a single white swan gliding across a perfectly still pond. It was music intended to mirror the light, airy fashions of the day: silk, lace, and powdered wigs. This shift reminds us that art often moves in long, slow cycles, swinging back from complexity toward a restorative simplicity whenever the human spirit needs to breathe and find its centre again in the uncomplicated beauty of a single clear line. As the Galant style brought a new lightness to the ears of Europe, the physical materials used to create those sounds remained deeply tied to the secrets of the earth and the passage of time. Picture a workshop in 18th century France where a master bowmaker or archetier is carefully examining a rare, dense piece of timber known as Pernambuco wood. This specific wood, harvested from the heartwood of a tree found only in the Atlantic forests of Brazil, possesses a miraculous combination of properties that no other material on Earth can match. It is incredibly heavy and dense, yet it possesses a spring-like elasticity that allows it to be bent into a permanent, graceful curve under intense heat. This wood became the gold standard for the modern violin bow, perfected by François-Xavier Tourte. When a musician holds a Pernambuco bow, they are holding a piece of natural history that has been seasoned for decades. The wood's unique ability to transmit the vibration of the string directly to the player's fingertips allows for a level of nuance and bounce that makes the violin seem like a living extension of the musician's own nervous system. It is a testament to the fact that the most sophisticated human art often relies on a very specific, fragile miracle of biology found in a distant, sun-drenched forest. The vibration travelling through that Brazilian wood is a physical conversation between the musician and the air, a dialogue that requires no words to convey a profound sense of safety. You might find that as you listen to these histories, your own internal dialogue begins to quiet. The words start to feel less like information, and more like a soft rhythmic texture, similar to the grain of polished wood or the weave of a heavy linen curtain. Your mind is free to simply drift, knowing that the foundation of the story is secure. The physical resonance of wood is most majestically displayed in the king of instruments, the pipe organ, which transforms an entire building into a single breathing lung. Imagine standing at the base of a towering organ in a northern German cathedral, where the pipes stretch upward like a silver forest toward the vaulted stone ceiling. Some of these pipes are as tiny as a child's whistle, while the largest, the 32-foot open wood diapasons, are massive hollow trunks that can hold hundreds of gallons of air. When the organist presses a pedal with their foot, a heavy wooden valve opens deep in the wind chest, and a massive column of air begins to vibrate. The frequency produced by these largest pipes is so low that it exists at the very bottom of the human threshold of hearing. You don't just hear the note, you feel it as a gentle rhythmic pulsing in the air against your skin and a slow vibration in the soles of your feet. This is the voice of God in the Baroque tradition, a sound so vast and all-encompassing that it anchors the listener to the very earth, providing a physical sensation of being held by a force much larger than oneself. It reveals that music can be an architectural experience, turning the invisible air into a solid, vibrating structure that we can inhabit. This sensation of being enveloped by sound reached a peak of shimmering, light-filled beauty in the late 19th century with the birth of musical impressionism. Imagine standing on a bridge overlooking a pond covered in water lilies as the sun begins to set, blurring the lines between the water, the sky, and the reeds. The French composer Claude Debussy sought to capture this exact optical blurring in his music. He broke away from the traditional rigid scales of the past and began using the whole tone scale, where every note is an equal distance from the next. To the human ear, this creates a feeling of weightlessness, as if the music has no home to return to and no gravity to pull it down. He used the orchestra like a painter's palette, layering the silvery light of the flute over the dark, woody resonance of the English horn. In his masterpiece La Mer, the music doesn't tell a story about the sea, it becomes the sea. The sounds ebb and flow in unpredictable, glittering patterns, mimicking the way light dances on moving water. It is music that invites the listener to stop looking for a destination and instead find peace in the eternal, shifting present, much like watching clouds drift across a summer sky. As the Impressionists blurred the lines of melody and harmony into a wash of colour, they were following a path of emotional honesty that had been blazed decades earlier by the great Romantics. Consider the quiet inward revolution of the German Lied, or art song. Picture a small candlelit room in Vienna in the 1820s. A small group of friends is gathered around a piano, listening to a singer perform a poem set to music by Franz Schubert. In these intimate settings, the piano was no longer just a background accompaniment. It became a character in the story. If the poem was about a spinning wheel, the piano played a constant, whirling, hypnotic rhythm. If the poem was about a brook, the piano became the bubbling water. This was the Schubertiade, a celebration of the private interior life. It proved that the most profound human experiences don't always require 100 musicians on a stage. They can be captured in the subtle interplay between a single voice and a keyboard. This focus on the small and the personal reminds us that our own quietest thoughts and feelings are worthy of the most exquisite art, and that there is immense power in the delicate and the understated. The transition from the grand to the intimate is a natural part of the cycle of rest. You may feel your focus narrowing, moving away from the vast cathedrals and wide oceans, coming to rest in the small, warm space immediately around you. The world outside the room is becoming a distant, unimportant murmur, like the faint sound of a cello being tuned 3 floors below. You are the centre of a very quiet, very safe universe. While Schubert captured the intimacy of the human voice, other composers sought to capture the sheer, overwhelming power of the natural world through a concept known as program music. Imagine sitting in a darkened theatre in Paris in 1830, hearing Hector Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. Berlioz didn't just write a symphony, he wrote a detailed narrative that was handed out to every member of the audience. To represent a specific, recurring obsession, a woman he loved from afar, he created a musical theme called an idée fixe. This melody appears in every movement of the symphony, but it changes its costume to match the scene. In a ballroom, it becomes a swirling waltz. In a field, it becomes a lonely shepherd's call. And in a dark, feverish dream, it becomes a distorted, mocking dance. This was a revolutionary way of thinking about music as a cinematic experience long before cinema existed. It revealed the mind's incredible ability to associate sound with specific images and emotions, allowing a sequence of notes to act as a physical anchor for a memory or a dream, travelling with us through different landscapes of the soul. This cinematic quality of music is perhaps most surprisingly found in the history of the Toy Symphony, a charming piece long attributed to Joseph Haydn, but likely written by Edmund Angerer. Imagine a formal 18th century orchestra dressed in their finest livery, but tucked among the violins and oboes are musicians holding clay bird whistles, toy trumpets, rattles, and even a small triangle. As the elegant classical music unfolds, the room is suddenly filled with the playful, chaotic sounds of the nursery, the cuckoo of a water-filled whistle and the clack of a wooden rattle. This wasn't merely a joke, it was a sophisticated exploration of texture and a reminder that high art should never lose its sense of play. In the rigid hierarchical world of the European courts, the Toy Symphony invited a moment of genuine childlike wonder back into the adult world. It suggests that even within the most serious structures of our lives, there is always room for the light-hearted, the whimsical, and the joyful, sounds that speak directly to the part of us that remains forever curious and unburdened. That sense of curiosity led composers to find music in the most unexpected everyday objects, long before the modern era of experimental sound. Consider the anvil chorus from Giuseppe Verdi's opera Il Trovatore. Imagine the stage transformed into a gritty, firelit gypsy camp at dawn. To capture the rhythmic energy of the blacksmiths at work, Verdi didn't ask the percussionist to mimic the sound of a hammer. He instructed the stagehands to bring actual iron anvils onto the stage. The rhythmic clink-clank of metal striking metal becomes a driving, industrial heartbeat that cuts through the lush singing of the choir. It was a bold, visceral choice that brought the raw, clanging reality of physical labour into the refined atmosphere of the opera house. This reveals a fundamental truth about classical music. It is not a museum piece disconnected from life, but a living, breathing sponge that absorbs the sounds of the forge, the street, and the kitchen, turning the common materials of our daily existence into something rhythmic, structured, and surprisingly beautiful. This absorption of the real world into the musical world is most beautifully expressed in the concept of the nationalist schools of the 19th century. Imagine the vast, icy fjords of Norway or the rolling, sun-baked plains of Bohemia. Composers like Edvard Grieg and Antonín Dvořák felt that their music should smell of the soil and the pines of their homelands. They began to collect the folk dances, the village songs, and the lullabies of the common people, weaving these simple, earthy melodies into the sophisticated framework of the symphony and the string quartet. Grieg's Peer Gynt captures the crystalline, cold air of the north, while Dvořák's Slavonic dances possess the foot-stomping rhythmic vitality of a village festival. These composers taught the world that there is a universal dignity in the local and the specific. By honouring the music of their own backyards, they created something that resonated with people thousands of miles away, proving that when we speak with the most authentic, grounded version of our own voice, we are speaking a language that the whole world can understand and find comfort in. As you consider the roots of these melodies reaching deep into the soil of different lands, you might feel your own roots extending, anchoring you to this moment of total stillness. The weight of your body is a physical expression of your connection to the earth, a steady and unchanging fact. You are as much a part of the natural order as a spruce tree in the Italian Alps or a basalt column in a Scottish cave. Everything is exactly as it should be. This journey from the earth to the sky and back again is perhaps most perfectly encapsulated in the life of a single, humble instrument, the flute. Imagine a piece of hollow bone, carved by a human hand over 35,000 years ago in a cave in modern-day Germany. This is the oldest known musical instrument in the world. It is the direct ancestor of the silver and gold concert flutes that shimmer at the front of the orchestra today. The physics of the flute are a miracle of simplicity. It is nothing more than a column of air being split by a sharp edge, the musician's breath hitting the lip of the embouchure hole. Unlike the reed instruments, which can be buzzy and nasal, or the brass, which can be aggressive, the flute produces a sound that is pure, a tone that consists almost entirely of a single, clear frequency, with very few distracting overtones. This purity is why we associate the flute with birds, with the wind, and with the first light of morning. It is the sound of the human breath being transformed directly into light. It reminds us that our most basic, vital function, the simple act of breathing in and out, is the very foundation of all beauty, a continuous, invisible thread that has connected every human being who has ever lived, from the prehistoric cave to the modern city, in a single, long and peaceful melody that shows no sign of ending. That beautiful illusion of a melody that never breaks, an acoustic exhalation that seems to defy the very biological limits of the human lung, is actually achieved through a remarkable, deeply hidden physical technique known as circular breathing. Imagine a solitary oboe player standing in a shaft of dim light on an otherwise dark stage. To the listener resting in the auditorium, the sweet, reedy, piercing note spins out continuously for minutes at a time, floating effortlessly over the quiet rustle of the string section, like a long, unbroken thread of silver silk. But inside the musician's mouth, a deeply rhythmic, highly disciplined cycle is taking place entirely out of sight. As the player pushes the absolute last remaining volume of air from their lungs out through the wooden instrument, they simultaneously inflate their cheeks, turning their own face into a small, temporary pressurized reservoir of air. While the muscles in the cheeks squeeze that stored warm breath forward to keep the delicate wooden reed vibrating, the musician quickly and silently inhales fresh oxygen through their nose. It is a seamless, looping, invisible exchange. It is a beautiful physical paradox where inhaling and exhaling happen at the exact same, suspended moment in time. This ancient technique essentially turns the fragile human body into a perpetual motion machine of sound, demonstrating our profound, enduring desire to stretch a single, fleeting moment of pure beauty into an expansive, unbroken, and endless horizon. This deep desire to draw out the longest, most continuous and resonant sounds from a wooden instrument often relies heavily on the smallest, most granular, and ancient forces of the natural world. Consider the elegant, sweeping, fluid motion of a cellist's bow. From a distance, it appears perfectly smooth and frictionless, gliding effortlessly back and forth across the thick metal strings like heavy ice skates, carving long arcs on a frozen pond. But if you were to look incredibly closely at that stretched ribbon of white horsehair under a powerful microscope, you would see a jagged, rough, and uneven surface, carefully coated in a fine, crystalline golden powder. This magical powder comes from a small, perfectly polished, amber-coloured block of rosin. Rosin is nothing more than hardened, purified sap harvested directly from the trunks of ancient pine trees. Before a concert begins, musicians rhythmically and deliberately rub this golden block of sap up and down the hair of their bows. The sticky, fragrant pine dust creates a layer of microscopic friction, allowing the horsehair to softly grip and then release the heavy metal string thousands of times per single second. Without this ancient, fragrant golden resin, the hair would slide silently and uselessly across the instrument, producing absolutely no sound at all. It is a deeply grounding, beautiful realization that the soaring, majestic, and sophisticated voice of the entire string section is completely, fundamentally dependent on the sticky, protective lifeblood of a quiet, towering, and sun-drenched pine forest. As you picture that ancient, shadowed forest, you might feel the quiet, deeply rooted stillness of the heavy trees settling slowly into your own limbs, the muscles in your arms and legs naturally grow heavier, sinking deeper and deeper into a state of total supported relaxation. Your breathing becomes as slow, steady, and unhurried as the deep, distant, romantic call of a hunting horn echoing through the misty woods at twilight. The modern orchestral French horn, with its gleaming, complex, and mesmerizing coils of polished brass, carries the ancient memory of those dense European forests in its very shape and soul. If you were to carefully uncoil a standard, tightly wrapped orchestral horn and stretch its metallic tubing out into a single, perfectly straight line, it would reach an astonishing, towering length of 12 to 13 feet. To make this massive, unwieldy length of metal manageable for human hands, master artisans curled the brass into a perfect, overlapping, compact circle that naturally hugs the body. But the most intimate, uniquely human element of the horn lies in exactly how it is played. The musician does not just blow air into a mouthpiece. They rest their right hand deep inside the wide, flaring golden bell of the instrument itself. By subtly shifting the angle of their palm and the curve of their fingers, they can physically muffle the sound, lowering the pitch and creating a shadowy, veiled, profoundly distant tone known as hand stopping. The musician is literally cradling the invisible sound waves in the soft palm of their hand, physically shaping and comforting the vibration before it is gently, finally released into the open air of the concert hall. Sometimes the open air itself answers back, playfully blurring the strict lines between human, mathematical composition and the spontaneous, joyful music of the natural world. In the cool, bright spring of 1784, the legendary composer Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was walking quietly through the bustling cobblestone streets of Vienna. As he passed a small, unassuming pet shop, he heard a bright, piercing sound that stopped him completely in his tracks. A small, caged European starling was happily whistling a melody. To his absolute wide-eyed astonishment, it was the exact, highly complex theme from the final movement of his own Piano Concerto No. 17, a grand piece he had only very recently completed. The clever, attentive bird had somehow learned the tune by listening to it drift out of a window, but it playfully, naturally altered one of the specific musical notes, shifting a natural tone to a sharp. Mozart was so utterly charmed, so deeply moved by this tiny, feathered, impromptu collaborator, that he bought the bird immediately. He kept it as a beloved singing companion in his study for many years, even writing a loving formal elegy for it when it eventually passed away. It is a beautiful, light-hearted, and deeply relaxing reminder that classical music is not just a rigid academic pursuit locked away in grand, unapproachable concert halls. It is a living, joyful, breathing language that can be shared, playfully altered, and sung back to us by the smallest, most innocent creatures sitting in a sunlit window. While Mozart found brilliant harmony and companionship in the bright, cheerful chirp of a small starling, earlier eras of human history sought the divine exclusively in the unadorned, pure, and haunting resonance of the collective human voice. Travel back in your mind to the vast, shadowy, echoing stone cathedrals of the Renaissance. Here, the highest, most respected form of musical expression was performed entirely without the aid of hollow wood, polished brass, or stretched gut strings. This specific, pure style of singing is known as a cappella, a beautiful Italian phrase that simply and literally translates to "in the style of the chapel." In these deeply sacred, cavernous spaces, mechanical instruments were often strictly forbidden, viewed as unnecessary worldly distractions from spiritual contemplation. The only instrument permitted was the invisible, fleshy one housed securely within the human chest. When a choir of monks or trained singers sang a cappella in a soaring, vaulted stone cathedral, the massive architecture of the building itself became the accompanying, amplifying instrument. The long, drawn-out echoes blending seamlessly high above the cold stone floor created a natural, shimmering acoustic halo of perfect harmony. Stripping away the complex mechanics of physical instruments, left nothing but the pure, naked vulnerability of human breath and shared intention, proving beautifully that the most profound and overwhelming beauty can be achieved using absolutely nothing more than the simple breath we're all born with. You already possess everything you need right now, in this very moment, to experience deep, restorative, and complete peace. There is nothing extra to add, nothing to perform, and no complex instrument to master. You can simply exist, safely enclosed and perfectly protected in the quiet, comforting architecture of this moment. Even the most famous, powerful, and heavily trained voices in the world occasionally need a hidden, guiding presence to help them feel safe and secure in the bright spotlight. In the grand, velvet-draped, heavily gilded opera houses of Europe, there is often a tiny, almost completely concealed wooden box built directly into the very front edge of the stage floor, facing away from the massive audience. Inside this cramped, dimly lit secret space sits a highly trained musician known as the prompter. As the sprawling, intense, multi-hour drama unfolds on the stage above them, the prompter closely and intensely follows the massive, complex musical score. Just a tiny fraction of a second before a famous singer is supposed to deliver a crucial, difficult line, the prompter gently, rhythmically whispers the first few words up to them. This soft whisper is entirely inaudible to the thousands of people sitting quietly in the dark auditorium, but to the anxious, sweating soloist standing under the blinding stage lights, it is a crucial, invisible, and incredibly comforting lifeline. It is deeply soothing to know that even at the absolute pinnacle of classical performance, no one is truly standing or singing alone. There is always a quiet, supportive, hidden voice waiting patiently in the shadows, gently guiding them exactly where they need to go. That soft, hidden support system, operating completely out of sight, is exactly what allows the most delicate and quiet instruments to finally find their true, resonant voice and safely project their warmth into the wide world. Consider the classical guitar, an instrument of profound, quiet intimacy, deeply associated with the warm, sun-baked, tile-covered courtyards of Andalusia. For many centuries, the guitar was considered far too quiet, too fragile, and too subdued to ever command a massive, echoing concert stage alongside the booming projection of violins and grand pianos. But in the mid-19th century, a brilliant, patient Spanish luthier named Antonio de Torres fundamentally revolutionized its hidden, internal acoustic architecture. Instead of just reinforcing the flat wooden top of the guitar with heavy, rigid, straight beams, Torres glued 7 incredibly thin, delicate, hand-carved strips of pale spruce wood underneath the soundboard. He arranged them in a wide, sweeping, elegant fan shape, radiating outward from the sound hole like rays of hidden sunlight. This hidden fan bracing acted exactly like a highly sensitive wooden nervous system. It captured the tiny, subtle vibration of the softly plucked nylon string and distributed it evenly across the entire broad surface of the wood, miraculously transforming the flat front of the guitar into an incredibly efficient, highly responsive acoustic speaker. By thoughtfully changing the invisible structural skeleton hidden inside the dark, hollow box, Torres allowed the quiet, melancholic whisper of the strings to suddenly bloom, expanding to fill entire concert halls, gently elevating a quiet, fireside folk instrument into an enduring emblem of classical elegance. The sweeping, radiating lines of that hidden, supportive wooden fan provide a steady, unchanging and perfectly reliable foundation for the delicate melody to dance upon, functioning very much like a specific hypnotic musical technique known as the basso ostinato, or the ground bass. In the Baroque era, brilliant composers like Henry Purcell and Johann Pachelbel frequently built their most emotional, soaring works over a surprisingly simple, heavy, and constantly repeating loop of sound. Imagine a deep, slow, resonant melody played by the low cellos and the heavy wooden double basses, Perhaps just 4 or 8 simple notes descending slowly step by step like a gentle carpeted staircase. This exact same heavy grounding phrase is played over and over and over again, without ever changing its deliberate pace or its familiar shape. It creates an inevitable, deeply calming circular cycle, very similar to the steady, reliable creaking turn of a wooden water wheel, or the rhythmic, endless crashing of dark ocean waves against a moonlit shore. While the high, silvery violins and the passionate singers weave increasingly complex, frantic and soaring variations high above it, the ground bass remains totally unbothered, firmly anchoring the entire composition to the earth. It creates a deeply soothing, almost hypnotic psychological effect, assuring the resting listener that no matter how wild, complicated or dramatic the emotional journey above becomes, the solid foundation will always softly return, reliable, heavy and totally safe, exactly where it is expected to be. This deep ingrained human recognition of a specific, constantly returning note is beautifully magnified in individuals who possess a rare, fascinating and mysterious neurological trait known as absolute pitch, commonly referred to as perfect pitch. For the vast majority of us, understanding and identifying a musical note is entirely a matter of relativity. We know a note is relatively high or relatively low only in direct comparison to the one that was played right before it. But for a person naturally gifted with absolute pitch, every single vibrating frequency in the audible world possesses a distinct, immediate, and unchangeable identity, as obvious and immediate as recognizing the visual color blue or the sharp smell of fresh rain on hot pavement. If a fragile glass teacup accidentally clinks against a porcelain saucer in a quiet, empty cafe, their brain instantly, effortlessly, and unconsciously registers the ringing sound as a perfect, exact B-flat. If the winter wind whistles softly through a narrow wooden gap in an old window frame, they instantly recognize the sharp, icy, sustaining tone of an F-sharp. They do not need to calculate, pause, or think. They simply know. This incredibly rare, almost magical acoustic ability turns the chaotic, randomly noisy waking world into a constant, hidden, highly structured symphony. Every distant car horn, every ringing church bell, and every heavy footstep on a hollow wooden floor becomes a specific named character in a lifelong, comforting acoustic landscape. Yet, for all the undeniable brilliance of perfect pitch, and all the soaring, mathematically complex majesty of grand symphonies, there is an enduring, profound and heavy beauty in the ancient instruments that were intentionally designed to be quiet, imperfect and heavily shadowed. Long before the modern, brightly varnished cello totally dominated the lower string section, with its powerful, projecting and penetrating tone, the Renaissance and Baroque eras deeply favoured a highly melancholic, multi-stringed instrument called the viola da gamba. The name itself translates softly and intimately to the viol of the leg, as the seated musician rests the large, beautifully carved, sloping wooden instrument gently between their calves, rather than aggressively anchoring it into the floorboards with a sharp metal spike. Unlike the smooth, fretless neck of a modern cello, the wide fingerboard of the viola da gamba is carefully tied with raised gut frets, very much like a lute or a guitar, and it features 6 or 7 thick, low-tension gut strings. When the heavy, loose wooden bow is drawn across them, the instrument does not sing with a loud, aggressive or demanding projection. Instead, it speaks with a husky, deeply textured, complex and intensely breathy resonance. It was an instrument designed entirely for small, aristocratic, private chambers, intimately meant to be played late at night in rooms lit only by a dwindling, crackling fire. Its sombre, hushed, and incredibly gentle voice seems to carry the literal heavy weight of history within its hollow, ornate wooden body, offering a slow, dark, and profoundly comforting acoustic embrace that asks absolutely nothing of the tired listener but to sink deeply into the quiet, warm shadows and simply rest. To find the source of those particular comforting shadows, one must often look incredibly closely at the fragile physical architecture of the ancient instruments themselves. Imagine the softly lit, dusty workshop of a master craftsman in the 16th century, the air heavy with the sweet, dry scent of aged cedar and sharp pine shavings. Resting gently on the worn wooden workbench is the rounded, teardrop-shaped body of a Renaissance lute. If you look closely at the centre of the pale spruce soundboard, you will not see a simple, open, dark hole like you would on a modern acoustic guitar. Instead, you will see a breathtakingly delicate, intricate geometric pattern known as the rose. This mesmerising mandala-like web of interlocking stars and vines is not a separate decorative piece of wood inserted into the instrument. It is carved directly and painstakingly out of the existing soundboard itself. The luthier uses microscopic, razor-sharp knives to carefully slice away the negative space, leaving behind a fragile wooden lace that is sometimes only a single millimetre thick. When a candle is placed near the instrument, this wooden web casts intricate, dancing, star-shaped shadows against the far wall of the workshop. It is a stunning intersection of ancient Islamic geometry, mathematics, and musical acoustics, creating a beautiful shadowed veil that allows the warm, resonant breath of the hollow lute to gently escape into the quiet room. That intricate visual geometry designed to guide the sound has a modern counterpart designed specifically to guide the human eye. Picture the towering golden silhouette of a concert harp resting silently on a darkened stage. To the untrained observer, the harp presents a dizzying, overwhelming waterfall of 47 identical, tightly stretched strings, blurring together into a sheer, vibrating curtain of tension. To prevent the harpist from becoming completely, hopelessly lost in this dense, unmapped forest of wire and gut, the instrument relies on a beautifully simple, deeply intuitive visual map. All of the C strings across the entire instrument are permanently dyed a deep, translucent, glowing red. All of the F strings are coloured a cool, dark, inky blue or black. As the stage lights hit this massive golden frame, these coloured threads act as vital, glowing buoys in a vast ocean of silver. They provide constant, reliable visual anchors, allowing the harpist's calloused fingertips to instinctively find their exact placement, leaping, gliding, and cascading blindly and safely across the vast expanse. It is a beautiful, necessary marriage of sight and sound, where visual colour perfectly maps the invisible, deeply structured geography of the musical scale. When a musician wishes to navigate away from the bright, ringing clarity of those plucked strings and into a space of absolute hushed intimacy, they rely on a deeply hidden, physical transformation. Consider the heavy, polished bulk of the concert grand piano. When a pianist wants to create a sound that is barely a whisper, a tone of extreme, fragile softness, they gently press the leftmost brass pedal with their foot. This is known as the una corda pedal. Its action is not merely acoustic, it is profoundly, mechanically physical. Pressing this pedal silently and smoothly slides the entire massive thousands of parts, keyboard and hammer mechanism just a few millimeters to the right inside the heavy wooden case. The soft, teardrop-shaped felt hammer, which normally strikes 3 tense steel strings simultaneously to create a loud, full note, now only grazes 2 strings, or it strikes them with a softer, fluffier, unused portion of the felt head that hasn't been hardened by years of forceful playing. It literally changes the physical reality of the instrument in real time, intentionally creating an acoustic shadow, much like a heavy velvet curtain being drawn slowly across a brightly lit window to welcome the absolute quiet of the night. As the internal mechanisms of the piano shift gently into this softer, quieter alignment, your own body can naturally mirror this deep, internal settling. The rhythm of your breath organically deepens and slows. The mind can simply drift without any need to focus, and the heavy physical weight of your limbs is completely supported by the soft surface beneath you. This profound feeling of sinking into a deeply supported, perfectly natural state has a beautiful, specific name in the world of classical music. In vocal performance and orchestral composition, there is a comforting, foundational concept known as tessitura. This Italian term does not refer to the absolute highest, most straining, glass-shattering note a soprano can possibly reach, nor the lowest, most gravelly rumble a bass can produce. Instead, it refers to the specific, warm, central, and unforced range where their voice sits most comfortably, naturally, and beautifully. It is the acoustic equivalent of sinking into a perfectly worn-in armchair, or wrapping yourself in a heavy, familiar quilt on a cold evening. Brilliant composers study a specific singer's tessitura intimately to ensure the majority of the melody dwells peacefully in this effortless golden zone. It is a gentle, recurring reminder that our truest resonance, our most beautiful and enduring power, comes not from constantly straining to reach our absolute exhausting limits, but from finding deep comfort in our most natural, unforced resting state. Much like a wandering river eventually finding its deepest, calmest, and most effortless channel through the earth, the voice simply settles where it was always meant to flow. The search for that perfect, comforting, unforced resting state led Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart to become deeply infatuated with an instrument that seemed to live entirely in the shadows. Picture a cool, foggy evening descending upon the cobblestone streets of 18th century Vienna, the fading sunlight turning the sky into a deep bruised shade of indigo and violet. This twilight atmosphere is the exact acoustic colour of the basset horn, an unusual, slightly curved, deeply resonant member of the clarinet family. It was typically crafted from rich, dark boxwood or mahogany, featuring a distinct gleaming brass bell at the very bottom. Mozart was utterly captivated by its dark, smoky, and deeply melancholic timbre. The cool, silver mechanical keys pressed against the dark, oiled wood provided a striking visual contrast to the shadowy sound it produced. He found it far more expressive and mournful than the standard bright clarinet. He used its dusky voice extensively in his final, mysterious, unfinished masterpiece, the Requiem, specifically because its tone seemed to exist perfectly on the fragile, quiet threshold between the bright, waking, living world and the shadowy, eternally resting realms beyond. It is an instrument built and breathed into life entirely to sing in the comforting twilight. To perfectly balance the smoky voice of the basset horn against the sweeping violins and the heavy cellos, a conductor must be able to see the entire vast architecture of the twilight landscape at a single sweeping glance. When you watch a maestro step onto the podium and open the massive oversized book resting on the wooden stand, they are engaging in a staggering, almost superhuman feat of visual processing. They are reading a full orchestral score. Unlike reading a traditional novel, where the eyes simply track a single line of text from left to right, a single page of an orchestral score might contain 25 or 30 separate simultaneous horizontal lines of music, stacked vertically like the transparent floors of a towering, intricate skyscraper. The conductor must read vertically to understand the massive, complex chord happening in this exact fleeting millisecond, and horizontally, tracking where every single individual instrument is flowing next. They are simultaneously digesting the past, the present, and the future of over 100 highly trained musicians, seamlessly turning a chaotic, dense visual grid of black ink into a unified, breathing, emotional river of time. In the absolute ringing silence of the hall, just a fraction of a second before the baton falls for the very first downbeat, the conductor's mind has already mapped the entire sweeping landscape of the opening phrase. To guide that massive, breathing river of time, the conductor requires a tool of supreme, focused clarity. Today, we expect to see a sleek, perfectly balanced, bright white fiberglass or wooden baton piercing the air. but the origins of this vital tool are far more humble, quiet, and deeply organic. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, before the dedicated manufactured baton became a standard fixture on the podium, great conductors like Felix Mendelssohn or Carl Maria von Weber would often simply reach for the music itself. They would take a heavy piece of parchment sheet music, roll it tightly into a stiff, pale cylinder, and use it to gently slice through the stage lights. Sometimes, they would grab a slender wooden violin bow resting nearby to quietly sweep the air. The most powerful, unifying and commanding tool on the grand stage was often just the raw material of the music itself, rolled into a quiet wand, silently tracing arcs through the shadows to ensure the collective breathing of the orchestra remained perfectly aligned and unbroken. It was a deeply organic, almost poetic gesture, using the physical embodiment of the composer's thoughts to silently carve the air and draw those very same thoughts out of the waiting instruments. Notice how the smooth, sweeping rhythm of that invisible conductor's gentle arc perfectly matches the slow, natural rise and fall of your own resting chest. There is absolutely no rush. You're exactly where you need to be, drifting safely and weightlessly on the calm current of the unfolding sound. Yet occasionally the sweeping current of the orchestra demands a sound far heavier, far more physical, and far more shocking than rolled parchment or polished wood can ever provide. Imagine the cold, bitter, blinding snows of a sprawling Russian winter landscape. When Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky sat down to compose his monumental sweeping 1812 overture, he desperately wanted to capture the literal earth-shaking physical weight of historical conflict and ultimate triumph. He did not just write loud, crashing notes for the traditional cymbals and the timpani in the percussion section. His original, incredibly ambitious score explicitly calls for a battery of actual live military cannons to be fired in exact mathematical rhythm with the soaring orchestra. While it is rarely performed with real, booming artillery today due to the sheer, obvious logistical dangers and the concussive force, the bold concept represents the absolute outer limit of the classical orchestra. It is the thrilling, heavy moment when composed, structured art physically spills over into the massive, echoing, chaotic reality of the waking world. The heavy, low-frequency shockwave of the blast would reverberate through the stone floors of an outdoor square, beautifully blurring the line between structured, mathematical music and the raw, rolling, untamed thunder of the elements. To bridge the massive acoustic gap between the booming, concussive power of the brass section and the delicate, warm agility of the woodwinds, a brilliant inventor decided to forge a completely new physical compromise. In the mid-19th century, an obsessive visionary Belgian instrument maker named Adolphe Sax stood in his hot, dusty, metal-filled workshop, surrounded by the smell of molten brass and sharp filing dust. He recognized a fundamental, frustrating divide within the orchestra. The woodwinds were warm, incredibly fast and intricately keyed, but lacked sheer, projecting power. The brass instruments were booming and majestic, but lacked delicate, nimble agility. He decided to physically marry the two opposing families. He took the conical, gleaming, heavy brass body of a horn and attached the delicate, vibrating, organic wooden reed of a clarinet, bound securely with a metal ligature. The stunning result was the saxophone. Though it is now heavily, almost exclusively associated with the late-night smoky improvisational world of jazz clubs, it was originally painstakingly conceived to perfectly bridge the gap between two opposing acoustic families in the rigid classical concert hall, proving that the most beautiful, enduring and unique creations often happen when two completely different, isolated worlds are seamlessly joined together. That beautiful, seamless joining of different elements is vividly brought to life by a deeply satisfying liquid musical technique known as the glissando. In classical notation, when a composer wants to completely wash away the rigid mathematical separation of individual notes, they draw a long, sweeping diagonal line across the page. Instead of pressing distinct separate keys or plucking individual strings, the musician is instructed to slide continuously across the entire landscape of the instrument. When a pianist performs a long descending glissando, they turn their hand slightly and drag the smooth back of their fingernail rapidly across the cool, heavy ivory keys. It creates a cascading, sparkling, unbroken waterfall of sound. The heavy internal cast iron frame of the piano catches this wash of frequencies, vibrating with a rich, sustained halo of overtones. It instantly blurs all individual sharp pitches into a single, rushing, magnificent wave. It represents a beautiful, fleeting surrender of strict, rigid control. For a brief, shimmering moment, the strict mathematics of the scale are entirely washed away, leaving only the pure, fluid, deeply relaxing sensation of continuous motion, gliding effortlessly toward the soft, silent, waiting edges of the darkened stage. When a musician arrives at those quiet edges, they sometimes find that the standard, rigid rules of their instrument must be entirely undone to reach the profound depths the composer requires. Imagine a solitary violinist sitting in the shadows, quietly preparing to play a deeply melancholic 17th century sonata by Heinrich Ignaz Franz Bieber. Instead of tightening the wooden pegs to bring the strings up to their brilliant customary tension, the violinist deliberately turns the pegs backward. They loosen the thick, tightly wound gut strings, allowing them to become visibly slack and physically relaxed against the dark wood of the fingerboard. This intentional, radical mistuning is a rare technique known as scordatura. By relaxing the physical tension of the strings, the entire acoustic nature of the violin fundamentally transforms. It loses its bright, soaring, piercing projection and suddenly gains a dark, husky, incredibly earthy resonance that rumbles low in the hollow belly of the instrument. It is as if the violin itself is exhaling a long, heavy breath, dropping its rigid posture to speak with a deeper, more intimate and profoundly relaxed voice, proving that sometimes the most beautiful resonance is found only by intentionally letting go of the tension we are taught to hold. The invisible humming vibration of those relaxed strings moving through the air can actually be captured and translated into perfect visible geometry. In the late 18th century, a brilliant physicist and musician named Ernst Chladni discovered a mesmerizing way to watch the invisible architecture of sound unfold in real time. Imagine a perfectly flat, dark square plate of brass or glass, mounted horizontally on a sturdy central pedestal. Chladni would carefully sprinkle a layer of fine, white granular sand across the dark surface. Then, taking a heavily rosined cello bow, he would draw it slowly and firmly down the very edge of the metal plate. Instantly, the flat metal begins to ring with a sustained, piercing tone. But the true magic happens on the surface. The invisible sound waves rippling through the brass physically force the white sand to leap and dance, pushing the grains away from the areas of violent vibration and allowing them to settle perfectly into the quiet, still, motionless fault lines of the plate. In the blink of an eye, the chaotic scattering of sand magically organizes itself into a breathtaking, perfectly symmetrical mandala of concentric circles, intersecting stars and delicate floral patterns. It is a stunning visual miracle, offering a literal physical portrait of harmony. The sound instantly draws its own flawless geometric reflection, revealing that the chaotic air around us is secretly governed by an elegant, invisible, and profoundly organized mathematical piece. As your mind visualizes those perfect resting geometries taking shape in the white sand, you might allow your own thoughts to naturally organize and settle into a state of quiet symmetry. The chaos of the waking day gently vibrates away, leaving only the still, silent fault lines where the mind can safely rest. The breath smooths out, becoming a slow, reliable tide, and the physical body grows wonderfully, comfortably heavy against the soft sheets. Sometimes, the invisible mathematics of the air perform an even more astonishing trick, creating a phantom presence that you can clearly hear, but which does not actually exist on the stage. If you were to sit perfectly still in a highly resonant stone-walled church and listen to two master violinists play two different, perfectly sustained, fiercely in tune high notes at the exact same time, a strange and magical acoustic phenomenon occurs. As the two distinct overlapping sound waves crash into each other in the empty space between the instruments, they interact physically, compressing and releasing the air in a complex mathematical rhythm. This collision generates a brand new, third wave, a deep, low, humming tone that seems to materialize completely out of thin air, hovering heavily in the center of the room. This is known as a combination tone, or a tartini tone, named after the legendary Italian violinist who first extensively documented it. The most fascinating aspect of this phantom note is that no physical instrument is actually vibrating to produce it. The low hum is being generated largely inside your own inner ear, as your biology beautifully decodes the mathematical interaction of the frequencies. It is an acoustic ghost, a comforting, resonant shadow note that the physical air and your own quiet biology cooperatively sing into existence. To fully appreciate the delicate, invisible dance of those phantom notes, one must also appreciate the sheer, massive, physical labour required to create the loudest, most brilliant flashes of light in the orchestra. Consider the towering presence of a heavy bronze cymbal resting quietly on a felt-covered stand at the very back of the percussion section. From a distance, it looks like a simple, smooth disc of stamped metal. But the creation of a truly world-class symphonic cymbal is an agonizingly slow, ancient, and deeply violent birth of fire and force. The artisan begins with a heavy raw ingot of specialized bronze, heating it in a roaring oven until it glows a blinding translucent orange. The scorching metal is rolled, cooled, and then repeatedly subjected to the rhythmic, deafening strike of a heavy metal hammer, guided entirely by the human hand. The artisan strikes the cooling bronze thousands upon thousands of times over many weeks. Every single tiny, dark dimple you see on the surface of a beautiful cymbal is the permanent physical memory of a heavy hammer strike. When the percussionist finally crashes two cymbals together at the climax of a symphony, the blinding, shimmering, hissing wave of white noise that floods the concert hall is actually the sudden, brilliant release of all that stored fiery rhythmic energy, transforming weeks of heavy, grueling physical labour into a single weightless second of acoustic light. That deep respect for the physical transformation of raw materials extends far beyond fiery metal, reaching deep into the damp, shadowed heart of the tropical rainforest. When a percussionist steps away from the brilliant brass and approaches the sprawling wooden keyboard of the concert marimba, they are preparing to play the resonant heartwood of the rosewood tree. The heavy, dark, reddish-brown wooden bars of the marimba produce a sound that is incredibly warm, round and liquid, a tone that falls on the ear like a heavy, perfectly formed drop of warm water. But simply cutting a piece of rosewood to a specific length will only yield a dull, unmusical thud. To make the heavy wood truly sing, the artisan must turn the wooden bar over and meticulously carve a deep, sweeping, curved arch directly into its underside. This deeply hidden, invisible carving is a masterpiece of acoustic tuning. The craftsman carefully shaves away microscopic slivers of wood from the arch to independently tune not just the primary fundamental note, but also the delicate higher overtones hiding within the grain. The hidden geometry underneath perfectly balances the acoustic weight of the wood, allowing it to ring with a pure, sustained, deeply comforting warmth that instantly grounds the listener in the ancient organic memory of the forest. The warmth of that resonating rosewood perfectly mirrors the heavy, comforting warmth spreading slowly and evenly through your own resting muscles. Your shoulders sink a fraction of an inch deeper into the mattress. The small muscles around your eyes completely soften, releasing their grip. You're a perfectly tuned, deeply supported instrument at absolute rest, requiring no effort, no tension, and no movement. Long before modern artisans learned to tune the hidden arches of tropical rosewood, the ancient world had already discovered a way to create a smooth, continuous, and highly engineered sound by harnessing one of the most fundamental forces of nature: the sheer, levelling weight of water. Travel back in your imagination over 2,000 years to the bustling, sun-baked city of Alexandria in ancient Greece. Here, inventors created the hydraulis, the very first keyboard instrument and the grand ancestor of the massive church organ. Before the invention of complex airtight leather bellows or electric air pumps, the ancients struggled to find a way to supply a constant, unwavering stream of air to a set of tuned bronze pipes. Their brilliant, elegant solution was a massive sealed vessel, partially filled with water. As air was manually pumped into the chamber by assistants, it displaced the water. The natural, heavy, incredibly stable desire of the water to return to its level state provided a perfectly constant, unyielding upward pressure on the trapped air, forcing it smoothly through the pipes when the musician pressed a wooden key. The earliest, grandest melodies of the ancient Mediterranean were quite literally powered by the calm, relentless, and deeply stabilizing physics of a quiet pool of water, finding its natural equilibrium. The desire to control the breath of an instrument eventually evolved from the heavy, wet architecture of ancient Rome to the highly portable, profoundly emotional, and deeply intricate lungs of the modern squeezebox family. Consider the bandoneon, a beautiful square-shaped instrument covered in dark wood, silver buttons and ornate mother-of-pearl inlays. While it is now universally recognized as the passionate, rhythmic and melancholic soul of the Argentine tango, it was originally invented in the mid-19th century for a far quieter purpose, to serve as a portable pipe organ for small, impoverished religious congregations in rural Germany. The true magic of the bandoneon lies in its center, a massive expanding bellows constructed from meticulously folded heavy cardboard, reinforced with supple leather and polished steel corners. When the seated musician slowly pulls their hands apart, this intricate geometric lung forcefully inhales the room's air across hidden metal reeds. Because the interior reeds are often tuned differently on the pulling motion than on the pushing motion, the instrument literally possesses two entirely different, distinctly emotional voices, depending on whether it is inhaling or exhaling. It breathes, it hesitates, it sighs, and it weeps with a rhythmic, physical effort that mimics the deep, expanding and contracting reality of the human chest, transforming a box of cardboard and steel into a living, breathing companion in the dark. Sometimes, the desire to transform an instrument requires placing foreign, entirely unexpected objects directly into its most delicate hidden spaces. In the mid-20th century, the highly inventive American composer John Cage was tasked with writing a percussion piece for a modern dance performance, but the theatre stage was far too small to fit a sprawling battery of drums and cymbals. Only a single black grand piano sat in the corner. Cage's brilliant, quiet solution was the invention of the prepared piano. He lifted the heavy wooden lid of the instrument and spent hours carefully, meticulously wedging ordinary, mundane, everyday objects perfectly between the tense steel strings. He placed a small brass screw between two strings here, a soft strip of dense white felt there, a tiny wedge of pencil eraser over there. By carefully altering the vibrating mass of the strings with these tiny objects, he completely revolutionized the instrument. When the pianist presses the keys, the expected romantic sweeping chords are gone. Instead, the piano produces a quiet, rhythmic, incredibly intricate galaxy of miniature sounds, tiny gongs, muffled thuds, metallic snaps and wooden clicks. He transformed the massive, sweeping king of instruments into a quiet, delicate clockwork forest of tiny, intricate acoustic shadows, proving that an entire, uncharted universe of sound can be found simply by altering our perspective of the familiar. Just as those small, quiet and seemingly mundane objects found their perfect, deeply purposeful resting place between the heavy steel strings of the piano, you have found your own perfect place of rest tonight. There is a quiet, structured peace in exactly where you are. All the sprawling, complicated chords of the waking world have been gently muffled, leaving only a soft, rhythmic and deeply comforting silence. The smooth, flawless, and deeply comforting silence we eventually hear in a finished piece of music often betrays the incredibly messy, physical, and heavy human struggle required to build it. When we listen to the sweeping, perfect majesty of a symphony by Ludwig van Beethoven, it sounds as if it was handed down from the heavens in a single, uninterrupted stroke of divine genius. But if you were to walk into a quiet museum archive and examine Beethoven's original, handwritten sketchbooks, a profoundly different, deeply moving story emerges. The thick, heavy rag paper is violently scarred. Beethoven did not write with easy, flowing grace. He fought with the notes. The pages are covered in thick, chaotic, angry crossouts of black ink. He erased his mistakes with such intense, heavy and obsessive physical force that he frequently rubbed deep holes straight through the thick parchment, tearing the fibres of the paper apart in his desperate search for the perfect chord. The flawless, frictionless, and sweeping acoustic architecture that allows our minds to rest so easily today was born entirely from heavy, physical friction, messy human doubt, and staggering, stubborn perseverance. The beautiful music is the hard-won flower blooming directly out of the torn, heavily scarred soil of the parchment. When that hard-won music finally lifts off the torn page, travelling through the vibrating wood, the polished brass, and the spinning air of the concert hall, it must eventually, inevitably face its own ending. The final massive chord of a symphony is struck and the conductor freezes. But the sound does not instantly vanish. This lingering, fading acoustic ghost is heavily studied by architects and acousticians, and it is known by a specific, measurable term, reverberation time, or RT60. It is defined as the exact number of milliseconds it takes for a loud sound to fade away into absolute imperceptible silence, technically to drop by 60 decibels. A truly world-class concert hall is meticulously mathematically engineered to delay this death of the sound. The heavy plaster walls, the specifically angled wooden acoustic clouds hanging from the ceiling, and the plush, sound-absorbing velvet of the empty seats all work cooperatively to cradle the final chord, bouncing it gently back and forth across the vast space. In a perfect hall, that final shimmering chord will hang suspended in the air for a luxuriant 2 to 3 full seconds before it completely diffuses. It is a deeply intentional architectural twilight. The hall allows the listener to sit quietly in the fading resonance, watching the heavy golden light of the music slowly dip below the acoustic horizon, turning the simple act of fading away into a slow, magnificent and deeply peaceful event. To create those massive echoing events that eventually fill grand architectural spaces, composers often seek the exact opposite environment to do their actual writing. Picture a tiny single-room wooden cabin hidden deep in the dense pine-scented forests of the Austrian Alps, resting quietly on the edge of a perfectly still mirrored lake. Gustav Mahler, a composer globally renowned for writing symphonies of such staggering cosmic scale that they required hundreds of musicians and massive choirs, could not write a single note in the loud, bustling city of Vienna. The noise of carriages and crowds shattered his concentration. So, he built tiny, isolated composing huts in the woods, surrounded only by the quiet rustle of heavy leaves, the distant trickling of cold mountain streams, and the soft, white morning mist. He would retreat to these silent, cramped, deeply solitary spaces at the very first light of dawn. It is a beautiful, deeply comforting paradox. The most expansive, universally embracing and loudest music ever conceived was born in absolute monastic silence, proving that to create an entire universe of sound, one first needs an empty, quiet and perfectly still room. That desire to eventually bring a massive group of people together under one roof creates more than just a unified wall of sound. It creates a literal, biological harmony. When a massive choir of 50 or 100 singers stands together in the warm light of a church to perform a slow, sweeping choral work, a hidden, deeply physical synchronization begins to occur inside their chests. Advanced scientific studies using electrocardiograms have revealed that as the singers breathe together, matching their deep inhalations and slow exhalations perfectly to the phrasing of the sheet music, their actual heart rates begin to seamlessly align. The vagus nerve, which wanders through the chest and controls the heart's pacing, is physically stimulated by the deep, controlled collective vocalizations. Within minutes, the beating hearts of 100 different separate individuals naturally synchronize, speeding up and slowing down as one single unified pulsing organism. The music acts as an invisible magnetic pacemaker. It reveals that collective singing is not just an artistic endeavor. It is a profound biological tether, linking completely separate human bodies into a shared, peaceful, and entirely synchronized physical state of being. This deep urge to capture the rise and fall of the human voice on paper began long before the invention of the rigid 5-line musical staff we recognize today. If you were to open a heavy, leather-bound, illuminated manuscript from the 9th century, you would not see organized measures, sharp bar lines, or precise time signatures. Instead, hovering delicately just above the handwritten Latin words of the monks' chants, you would see tiny, sweeping black ink marks known as neumes. Drawn carefully by candlelight with a sharpened quill, these delicate, free-flowing symbols look beautifully like the footprints of tiny birds or the swirling, curling tails of wind currents. They did not tell the singer exactly which mathematical pitch to hit on a keyboard. They simply suggested the general, fluid, emotional shape of the melody, a gentle visual reminder to swoop up here or flutter softly down there. It was a deeply intuitive, visually poetic map that relied entirely on oral tradition and human memory, a gentle visual whisper from the past that treated a song not as a rigid mathematical equation, but as a living, breathing gesture tracing invisible arcs in the cold air. As you visualize those delicate, sweeping ink marks rising and falling on the heavy, textured parchment, you can allow the rhythm of your own thoughts to follow their gentle, unhurried path. The breath settles easily into a slow, quiet, reliable pattern. The body grows wonderfully heavy, sinking deeper into the soft mattress, completely released from the need to calculate, measure, or hold on to the rigid events of the waking day. The fluid freedom found in those ancient, unmeasured chants eventually inspired a massive revolution in modern classical music, sparked entirely by a chance encounter with a distant, vibrant culture. In the warm, golden summer of 1889, the city of Paris hosted the Great Universal Exposition. Amidst the towering steel of the newly built Eiffel Tower and the scent of roasted chestnuts in the humid air, the French composer Claude Debussy wandered into a foreign pavilion and heard something that completely changed his life: a Javanese gamelan ensemble. He stood absolutely mesmerized by the large ensemble of hand-cast bronze gongs, heavy wooden xylophones, and delicate shimmering metallophones. Unlike traditional European classical music, which constantly drives forward with heavy tension toward a structural resolution at the end of the phrase, the gamelan music seemed to hover, cycle, and float in a state of eternal, shimmering suspension. Debussy deeply absorbed this meditative, circular sense of time and immediately wove it directly into his own piano and orchestral works. He stripped away the heavy, forward-marching gravity of Western harmony, replacing it with floating, detached chords that simply exist in the present moment. He taught the Western ear how to finally stop rushing anxiously toward the end of the song, and how to simply rest in the beautiful, vibrating atmosphere of the current, hanging note. To perfectly create those floating, atmospheric, weightless chords, Debussy relied on an instrument that hides a staggering, almost unimaginable amount of raw, industrial physical tension beneath its polished, elegant surface. When you gaze at a beautiful concert grand piano resting on a stage, you see sweeping curves of black lacquer and the delicate, inviting smile of the ivory and ebony keys. But hidden inside the dark, cavernous belly of the wooden case lies a massive, heavy industrial beast, a single continuous plate of poured sand-cast iron. This heavy metal skeleton, forged in a roaring furnace and cooled slowly over many days, is absolutely necessary to anchor the piano's thick steel strings. In a modern concert grand, the combined pulling force of all 230 taut steel strings creates an astonishing 20 to 30 tons of constant, unyielding physical tension. The delicate, weeping, whisper-soft melodies of a romantic nocturne or a dreamy prelude are only acoustically possible because they are supported by the silent, colossal, unbreakable structural strength of cold iron. It is a profound, grounding reminder that true softness, grace, and delicate vulnerability often require a foundation of immense, hidden, and unshakable strength to safely cradle them. The immense tension held by that cast iron frame is awakened by the soft strike of a felt hammer, but for the string section of the orchestra, the singing voice is drawn out by a profoundly organic material that comes from the harshest, coldest landscapes on Earth. A master cellist's bow is an object of supreme lightweight elegance, crafted from rare tropical Pernambuco wood and balanced with delicate silver windings. Yet the flat ribbon of white hair stretched tightly across it must be incredibly resilient to withstand the constant, heavy friction of a 2-hour performance. To find this perfect, unyielding material, bowmakers must look far from the warm, velvet-lined concert halls of Europe, turning their attention to the freezing, windswept steppes of Mongolia and Siberia. They specifically seek the tail hair of horses that live exclusively in these bitter, freezing climates. To survive the extreme, plunging winter temperatures, the biology of the horse naturally produces hair that is incredibly thick, remarkably strong, and far more heavily textured than horses living in soft, temperate zones. Every time a violinist plays a soaring, impassioned, heart-wrenching solo, the beautiful, singing friction is physically provided by the rugged, wild endurance of an animal standing quietly in the freezing snow. It beautifully links the absolute, refined pinnacle of human high art directly to the raw, untamed resilience of the natural world. The rugged endurance of the natural world supports our highest art, just as the quiet, soft space you're resting in right now fully and completely supports you. Your mind can safely wander across those distant, snowy steppes, completely insulated and perfectly warm under the blankets. Nothing needs to be held too tightly. You can gently let the tension in your hands, your neck, and your jaw melt away, leaving only a soft, quiet, and deeply anchored calm. That incredible, wild resonance born from the friction of horsehair eventually finds its counterpart in the heavy brass section, where the exact shape of a tiny, hidden, sculpted cup can completely alter the emotional temperature of the entire symphony. If you place a trumpet and a French horn side by side on a table, they both appear to be complex, gleaming, heavy mazes of coiled golden brass. Yet the trumpet pierces the air with a bright, triumphant, highly focused beam of acoustic light, while the French horn covers the listener in a dark, warm, mellow, and deeply melancholic blanket of sound. The secret to this massive emotional difference lies almost entirely in the unseen, internal geometry of the small metal mouthpiece resting directly against the musician's warm lips. A trumpet mouthpiece is carved into the shape of a shallow, rounded bowl, which forces the fast-moving sound waves to bounce sharply and rapidly against the metal, creating a brilliant, bright edge. The French horn mouthpiece, however, is painstakingly carved into a deep, steep, plunging funnel. The sound waves do not bounce sharply. Instead, they slide smoothly and darkly down into the immense lengths of tubing without any harsh reflections. It is a microscopic, architectural difference that completely transforms the physics of the air, turning a blinding acoustic spotlight into a soft, glowing, deeply comforting amber lantern in the dark. The warm, glowing sound of that French horn was originally cultivated and designed to fill vast, sacred architectural spaces where the shape of the cold stone itself creates a comforting, magical acoustic embrace. In the great, towering, domed cathedrals of the Renaissance and the Baroque eras, brilliant architects unknowingly created a mesmerizing physical phenomenon known as the Whispering Gallery. Picture the massive, smooth, continuously curved interior of a soaring stone dome, perfectly symmetrical and reaching high into the shadows. The acoustics of this perfect, continuous curve are so uniquely efficient that a person standing on the high balcony on one side of the vast dome can turn their face directly to the cold stone wall and softly whisper a secret. The fragile sound waves do not scatter and die in the massive room. Instead, they cling tightly to the smooth, curving surface of the stone, travelling continuously along the circular wall until they reach a listener standing over 100 feet away on the exact opposite side, arriving perfectly clear and intimately audible. It is a stunning architectural miracle where the cold, heavy, monumental stone of the cathedral bends the invisible air to its will, catching the most fragile, quiet human breath and carrying it safely across the dark expanse without ever letting it fade or break. While the massive stone cathedral gently guides the solitary breath, the conductor standing on the podium guides the entire massive breathing organism of the orchestra with a small, quiet object that slowly, intimately adapts to the unique shape of the human hand. While the long white shaft of a modern baton is typically made from rigid, perfectly straight, unyielding fiberglass or carbon fiber, the small bulbous handle at the base is almost always crafted from natural cork. Cork is an incredibly light, porous and forgiving material harvested carefully from the thick bark of specialised oak trees baking in the warm Mediterranean sun. Over decades of a long, sweeping and passionate career, as the maestro intensely grips the handle through countless grueling rehearsals and grand, soaring symphonies, a beautiful physical transformation slowly occurs. The natural oils of the skin, the heavy heat of the stage lights, and the intense, repetitive physical pressure of the conductor's palm slowly compress the soft fibres of the cork. Year after year, the soft wood gently yields, moulding itself perfectly and permanently to the exact unique contours of that specific person's grip. By the twilight of their career, the baton is no longer just a manufactured tool purchased from a shop. It is a custom-carved, biological extension of their own body, carrying the literal physical impression of a lifetime spent passionately shaping the invisible architecture of sound in the air. The lifetime of sound contained within a symphony eventually, inevitably comes to a place of quiet, peaceful rest. In the rich, poetic, instructional language of classical sheet music, composers have many different ways to instruct a musician to finally end a piece. They can use the bold, sudden finality of a heavy crashing chord, or the slow, majestic, expanding broadening of a deliberate ritardando. But the most beautiful, deeply peaceful and haunting instruction is a single italicized Italian word written softly in ink at the very bottom of the final page, morendo. It literally translates to dying away. When a weary string quartet reaches a morendo marking, they do not just simply lower their volume mechanically. They intentionally let the sound lose its firm core, its focus and its physical energy. The tone becomes increasingly breathy, fragile and wonderfully, peacefully weak. The weight of the bow barely touches the metal string, the vibration of the wood visibly slows, and the music slowly dissolves, evaporating smoothly into the surrounding air like a thin wisp of grey smoke from a recently extinguished candle. It is not an abrupt, frightening ending, but a gentle, peaceful, and totally willing surrender. It is a beautiful, deeply comforting acoustic reminder that there is a profound grace in letting go, allowing the vibrant energy of the day to softly blur at the edges, slowly and inevitably dying away into the deep, welcoming and heavy quiet of the waiting night. Within this dark, quiet space, the memory of the music often splinters into beautiful drifting fragments of colour. In the early 20th century, composers like Arnold Schoenberg and Anton Webern began to experiment with a mesmerising, deeply atmospheric concept they called Klangfarbenmelodie. In German, this beautiful compound word literally translates to sound colour melody. rather than assigning a long sweeping melodic phrase to a single instrument, like a solitary violin singing alone in the dark, the composer passes the melody seamlessly, note by single note, through the different textures of the orchestra. A soft, breathy note from the flute is instantly handed off to the reedy, dark vibration of the oboe, which is then caught by the gentle, metallic pluck of the harp, and finally handed to a muted, distant trumpet. The musical pitch continues forward in a straight line, but the acoustic texture constantly shimmers and changes. It functions exactly like a slowly turning glass prism catching a single beam of white moonlight and shattering it into a slow-moving, continuously shifting spectrum of audible colour, proving that the shape of a melody is only half of its true, radiant identity. The desire to surround a musician with a private hidden world of colour and imagery stretches back hundreds of years to the very construction of the instruments themselves. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the master instrument builders of the Ruckers family in Antwerp crafted some of the most highly prized harpsichords in the world. When these heavy, rectangular instruments were closed for the evening, they looked like simple, austere blocks of dark, unadorned oak resting quietly in the corner of a room. But lifting the heavy, solid wooden lid revealed a breathtaking, secret universe. The entire underside of the lid was typically covered in an elaborate, masterful oil painting. The musician would open the instrument and suddenly be faced with a sweeping, tranquil pastoral landscape, complete with winding blue rivers, dark, shading oak trees, and quiet, crumbling ancient ruins. These hidden paintings were almost always paired with calming, gilded Latin mottos painted softly along the soundboard, such as Musica Laetitia comes medicina dolorum. Music is the companion of joy and the medicine for sorrow. It offered the isolated musician a deeply private, protected visual sanctuary, ensuring that even if they were practicing alone in a cold, grey and drafty room, they were always gazing into a warm, perfect, and endlessly peaceful horizon. Before those musicians could trace the notes on the keys, the music itself had to be carved into physical reality through a heavy, quiet, and deeply grounded craft. For centuries, the beautiful, flowing script of classical sheet music was not created by machines, but by the painstaking manual art of pewter engraving. To capture the composer's fluid thoughts, a solitary artisan would sit at a heavy wooden workbench in a quiet, dust-lit workshop. Resting before them was a thick, flat, heavy plate of soft metal. The engraver used a vast collection of specialized microscopic steel punches for every single musical symbol. One tiny steel pin for a quarter note head, another for the delicate curve of a treble clef, and a sharp, flat blade to carve the long, sweeping staff lines. They would carefully align the steel punch and tap it gently into the soft metal with a small, heavy wooden mallet. Every single piece of classical music played in the grand halls of Europe was physically born from this slow, deeply meditative rhythmic tapping of metal on metal in a quiet room, physically pressing the invisible weight of the sound permanently into the heavy, accommodating earth. That slow, deliberate rhythmic tapping of the artisan's wooden mallet perfectly mirrors the steady, reliable beating of your own resting heart. As you imagine that soft, rhythmic sound echoing in the quiet workshop, you can allow the heavy muscles in your jaw, your neck, and your shoulders to gently drop with it. There is absolutely no need to carry the weight of the waking day any longer. Your body is a heavy, completely relaxed anchor. Sometimes, the natural organic materials that make up the physical body of an instrument push back against the sound, requiring a gentle, microscopic intervention to bring them back to a state of peace. Cellists and luthiers are intimately familiar with a strange, naturally occurring acoustic phenomenon known as the wolf tone. Because the sweeping, curved wooden body of a cello is a physical object made from once-living spruce and maple, the hollow box has its own specific, natural resting frequency. When a cellist draws their bow and plays the exact note that matches this internal frequency, The vibrating steel string and the hollow wooden box begin to violently fight one another. The competing sound waves clash, creating a beating, stuttering, unsteady sound that resembles the guttural rhythmic howl of a wild wolf. To solve this, luthiers do not use heavy force or structural changes. Instead, they gently attach a tiny, elegant brass weight, lined with a soft sleeve of dark rubber, directly onto the offending string just below the bridge. This microscopic, quiet anchor absorbs the excess kinetic energy. It beautifully tames the wild, conflicting resonance, instantly bringing absolute peace, harmony, and a smooth, unbroken voice back into the grain of the dark wood. Taming the wild, chaotic energies of the day and bringing deep peace to the mind is the fundamental purpose of the oldest, most universal musical form in human history, the lullaby. In the Romantic era, this ancient domestic necessity evolved into a highly refined classical form known as the berceuse. In 1844, Frédéric Chopin composed his famously delicate berceuse in D-flat major, a masterpiece specifically engineered to perfectly recreate the physical, heavy sensation of a rocking cradle. The pianist's left hand is assigned a gentle, rolling, endlessly repeating ostinato pattern. It rocks back and forth between two simple chords, never once changing its tempo, its volume, or its hypnotic, grounding rhythm. It is the exact acoustic manifestation of the slow, heavy pendulum swing of a wooden bassinet, rocking steadily on a quiet floorboards. Above this incredibly secure, unchanging, and totally reliable foundation, the right hand weaves a delicate, descending, and increasingly intricate tapestry of silvery notes. The melody acts exactly like a heavy, warm, woven blanket being slowly and lovingly draped over the listener, layer by soft layer, providing an acoustic environment where the mind has absolutely no choice but to surrender to the slow, inevitable rhythm of sleep. The structure of that descending woven blanket is often not random at all. It is silently governed by the exact same, invisible mathematics that shape the physical growth of the natural world around us. Many brilliant composers, including Béla Bartók and Claude Debussy, either unconsciously or deliberately structured their sprawling musical compositions around the ancient, elegant proportions of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. This specific mathematical proportion is the exact blueprint found in the slow unfurling of a green fern in the spring, the sweeping logarithmic spiral of a nautilus shell in the dark ocean, and the tight symmetrical arrangement of seeds in the centre of a heavy sunflower. When a musical composition is mathematically paced so that its subtle shifts and emotional peaks arrive exactly at the golden ratio points of the timeline, the human brain miraculously subconsciously recognizes this ancient organic geometry. Even if we cannot articulate why, we feel a profound, unexplainable sense of rightness and deep relief. We are allowed to rest effortlessly in an acoustic structure that perfectly mirrors the biological architecture of the universe itself, proving that our minds are constantly, quietly searching for the comforting, balanced symmetry of nature. To set that massive universal architecture into motion, the conductor standing on the silent stage must first take a single, deeply intentional breath. In the formal structural language of music, the empty beat occurring right before the first actual note is struck is called the anacresis, or the upbeat. While the audience simply waits in the silence, the orchestra watches the conductor intensely, because the physical quality of their silent inhalation dictates everything that will follow. The sound has not yet begun, but the orchestra can read the emotion perfectly. A quick, sharp intake of air through the teeth signals a bright, nervous, driving energy, but a slow, deep, expansive, and completely unhurried breath through the nose tells the heavy string section to prepare for a sweeping, mournful, and oceanic movement. The entire emotional weight, the tempo, and the sonic colour of a massive 60-minute symphony is perfectly distilled, promised, and telegraphed in the absolute ringing silence of that single, shared, heavy intake of air. you can gently focus your own quiet attention simply on the slow, rising and falling rhythm of your breathing right now. Notice the cool, easy air entering and the warm, heavy air softly leaving. It requires absolutely no thought, no conscious effort, and no complex direction. It is a perfect, continuous, and entirely automatic cycle, an invisible engine keeping you safe, grounded, and deeply supported in the heavy comfort of this exact moment. While traditional orchestras rely on deep, sweeping breaths and highly refined, polished, varnished wood to create their grand melodies, breathtaking sounds can also be coaxed from the heavy, raw, unapologetic tools of human labour. In the early 20th century, an entirely unexpected, deeply enchanting instrument found its way onto the vaudeville and classical stages, the musical saw. It is, quite literally, nothing more than a standard, highly flexible sheet of tooth steel, typically forged and sharpened for the grueling work of cutting heavy timber. But when a seated musician places the wooden handle between their knees and bends the top of the metal blade into a precise curving S shape, the physics of the metal fundamentally change. This double curve creates a highly specific sweet spot in the centre of the blade, where the vibrations cancel out the harsh, unyielding rigidity of the steel. When the musician gently draws a heavily rosined cello bow across the dull, smooth back edge of this curved spot, the metal produces an astonishingly pure, ethereal and weeping soprano tone. By softly shaking their leg, the musician adds a wide, ghostly vibrato. It is a mesmerizing, unearthly sigh that sounds like a human voice drifting through a thick fog, proving beautifully that with enough care, gentle friction, and a slight shift in perspective, even the hardest, most utilitarian objects of our waking lives can be taught to sing a delicate, weightless lullaby. Sometimes, an instrument does not need to sing out loud at all to provide comfort. The music can exist entirely within the quiet, impenetrable safety of the mind. In the 19th century, legendary touring concert pianists like Franz Liszt and Sergei Rachmaninoff embarked on grueling, endless, months-long tours across the freezing, expansive landscapes of Europe and Russia. Travelling for days at a time in rattling horse-drawn carriages and dimly lit coal-fired steam trains, they desperately needed to keep the intricate muscles of their hands nimble and warm without constantly disturbing their fellow sleeping travellers. Their brilliant quiet solution was the invention of the dumb piano. These were heavy, wooden, portable keyboards built with fully functioning weighted ivory and ebony keys, complete with heavy metal springs to simulate the physical resistance of a grand piano. However, the wooden box contained absolutely no strings and no hammers. The virtuoso would sit alone in the dim, rocking carriage, staring out at the snow passing in the dark, their hands flying furiously and passionately over the silent keys. The grand, thundering, crashing chords and the delicate, whispering high trills existed entirely in the perfect, untouched, flawless acoustic sanctuary of their own imagination. It is a staggering testament to the power of the inner ear, proving that the deepest, most perfect experience of music requires no physical vibration in the air at all. The mind itself is the ultimate, flawlessly resonant concert hall. Eventually, those silent, internal dreams carried through the snow must be broadcast heavily into the wide, waking world, a task given to the heaviest, most monumental, and deeply resonant instruments ever created by human hands, the cast bronze bells of a carillon. Found hanging high inside the dark, draughty stone belfries of ancient European cathedrals and grand universities, a single, massive carillon bell can easily weigh over 10 tons. Yet, creating its perfect, ringing, and deeply soothing tone is a delicate, precise act of subtraction. After the massive bell is cast in a mould of dark, wet sand and allowed to cool slowly over many weeks, it does not naturally sing with a perfect chord. The raw bronze must be carefully hoisted onto a massive, slow-turning mechanical lathe. As the heavy bell spins, a master tuner uses a sharp steel blade to carefully scrape away thin, curling golden ribbons of metal from the deep, dark interior curve of the bronze. They are not merely tuning the main, fundamental booming note that you hear first. They are meticulously carving the different interior thicknesses of the bronze to tune the 5 distinct internal harmonic overtones that hide invisibly inside the metal's vibration. They patiently, quietly carve away the heavy weight until the bell perfectly mathematically harmonizes entirely with itself. When the heavy iron clapper finally strikes the tuned bronze, the bell sends a rich, organized, heavily structured, and deeply comforting blanket of perfect sound rolling slowly outward, covering the rooftops of the sleeping city below in a protective acoustic shadow, with the deep, low hum lingering in the air long after the metal has stopped moving. This lingering, invisible resonance finds its most profound and final expression in a mystery that exists at the very edge of the audible world, a phenomenon known as the endless note. Imagine a lone cellist standing in the centre of a perfectly circular windowless room made of polished white marble. As they draw their bow across the string one final time, the sound waves do not simply travel outward and die against the walls. Because of the room's perfect mathematical curvature and the unique density of the stone, the sound begins to orbit. It enters a state of perpetual microscopic feedback. Long after the musician has lowered their bow, long after they have walked out of the room and closed the heavy oak door, the air inside continues to tremble. This is not just a poetic idea. It is a fundamental truth of acoustics. Every note ever played, every symphony ever conducted, and every quiet lullaby ever hummed does not truly vanish. Sound is energy, and energy can only be transformed, never destroyed. The vibration simply grows smaller and smaller, receding into the microscopic fabric of the universe, becoming part of the silent background hum of the molecules and the distant cooling echoes of the stars. In this sense, the music we have explored tonight has never truly ended. It has simply settled into the foundations of the room around you, into the rhythm of your own pulse, and into the quiet, starlit air you are breathing right now. The 101st wonder is the realization that the music is always there, woven into the very silence itself, waiting patiently for the mind to grow quiet enough to feel its presence. The journey through these 101 wonders has now reached its destination, and like a grand symphony finally arriving at its closing shimmering chord, the air is beginning to grow very still. You have travelled across continents and centuries, from the frozen Italian forests and the stone theatres of Greece to the silent golden records drifting through the deep cosmos. You have seen the hidden iron skeletons of pianos and felt the rhythmic, steady breathing of ancient organs, and now you can let it all go. There is no need to remember a single name, a single date, or a single mechanical secret. These stories were merely a series of soft, rhythmic textures designed to carry you safely away from the bright, demanding noise of the day. Like the ink drying on a finished score, the details are fading into a soft, hazy blur. The names of the composers are becoming nothing more than a gentle, indistinent murmur, like the sound of wind through a distant canopy of trees. Your mind is now a vast, empty concert hall, the stage lights dimmed to a low, warm amber glow. The musicians have all quietly packed away their instruments and slipped out into the cool night air. The velvet curtains have been drawn shut, and the heavy oak doors are securely closed against the world outside. There is only the deep, heavy, and perfectly supported silence of the room. Feel the weight of your body completely surrendered to gravity. Every muscle in your face, your hands, and your feet has completely released its grip. Your breathing is a slow, effortless tide, moving in and out like the quietest, most distant swell of the ocean. You are perfectly safe. You are perfectly still. The world of action and effort has receded into the distance, leaving you in this cocoon of absolute, unshakable calm. The silence is not empty. It is a warm, protective, and deeply loving embrace. You have permission to stop listening now. You have permission to let the final echoes of the words drift away like smoke. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to know, and nothing left to hold. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.